Chapter 422. At this moment, old Dugu's soul had finally taken form. His gaze refocused as he looked in front of him, left and right in a daze. Finally, following Yun Yang's call, he saw Yun Yang in front of him. Then, he frowned and murmured as if he was in a dream, "Why are you here?" Yun Yang choked and said, "If I didn't come, how would I know what happened to you?" Old Dugu's expression tightened. He looked at his broken body lying lifelessly on the bed and suddenly thought of something. He sighed desolately and said, "Child, you shouldn't have come and you shouldn't have stayed here. Go." Hearing the word, Yun Yang felt even more sorrowful. He said, "I'm here to bring you back. I want to take care of you until you're old and dead." "Nonsense, I'm already dead." Old Dugu smiled faintly. "Dead, dead, dead. Everything is over, it's just a pile of rotten meat. It doesn't matter if I die, or if my enemy dies, it's the same as a pile of bones. Is it worth it for you to risk your life and carry such a pile of bones back? It's worth it." Yun Yang gritted his teeth. "Even if I die, I'll bring you back, father." Old Dugu sighed and said, "Foolish child. This old man can rest in peace and still see a descendant send me off. I'm content and have no more regrets. Don't do anything foolish. This is still Zilong City. With me as a burden, you won't be able to kill your way out alone." He frowned and said softly, "Child, I don't know what kind of mysterious technique you used to reassemble my spirit. However, I know my own situation. My spirit is starting to dissipate again. This also means that I don't have much time left. Instead of being wishy-washy about what will happen after my death, why don't you be patient and listen to what I have to say? Consider it as fulfilling the friendship between us." Yun Yang nodded hard and listened to old Dugu's lecture quietly. "After your seventh brother passed away, I really didn't have any desire to live in this world anymore. Actually, I should have died then." Old Dugu was silent for a bit before he said sadly, "However, if I can't avenge my son at least once, it's always a pity. In this year or so, there have been quite a number of generals and officials from various countries who have died in my hands. It's been a win-win. Come to think of it, it's reasonable to fall into their trap this time. We can't only be allowed to seek revenge, but not allow them to retaliate, can we? We won't do such an unreasonable thing. Life and death, hatred and resentment, are fair. Besides, this is also an end for this old man, a conclusion. The reason why I don't want to give up on life is probably because I still have one last wish. There's still something I can't let go of. I've always hoped to see you again. Originally, I had thought that there was no hope. Never would I have imagined that the heavens would care for me so much. I can finally see my child again. I can finally see my son again." Old Dugu's eyes were glued to Yun Yang's face. Dugu's eyes were filled with greed. Old Dugu's eyes. He knew that the person in front of him was his own child, his own family. "You must have exhausted a lot of energy to gather my soul with your arcane skill. I won't say much more." Old Dugu sighed contentedly. "What I want to tell you is my son's background. Actually, I don't know about my son's background either. I picked him up a long time ago, but there's a crescent-shaped symbol on his back. It seems to be the family symbol that some noble families would imprint on their children as soon as they gave birth. Inside the crescent-shaped symbol, there's a kill word, there's a horizontal stripe under the word. If you can find clues about this family or even find his parents, child, you must remember to ask them on behalf of your brother, why did they abandon me back then? If there's a reason, it's fine. If there isn't, you must seek justice for your brother. Such a family will never be unable to raise a child." Old Dugu said softly. "Yes." Yun Yang enunciated each word clearly. "I will find them in the future and ask them face to face why they abandoned my brother back then. There's one more thing. I found your brother by chance when I was searching for treasure at the Flaming Peaks. After that, I focused on raising my son and had no interest in the martial world anymore. I had long forgotten about it. Now that I think about it, it was a waste of that opportunity. However, this piece of treasure map that I have is only one of many pieces of treasure map. There are still many pieces that are lost in other places. However, the destination that the treasure map points to is a relic that existed tens of thousands of years ago. Inside this relic, there is a heavenly secret that can seize the fortune of heaven and earth. Those who are fated to enter this relic can ascend to godhood immediately. To be immortal. To be immortal. I originally kept this map in the jade pendant that I carried with me everywhere I went. However, because of this map, I was framed by someone and ended up where I am today. Now, this map has fallen into the hands of Ouyang Xiaoxi. If you have the time in the future, remember to find a chance to kill Ouyang Xiaoxi and take back our family's belongings. It's one thing to forget about our family's belongings, but it's another to have it taken away by someone else. Yunyang swore, this child will tear Ouyang Xiaoxi into pieces and torture his soul for 100 years. I won't let him die so easily. Old Dugu's body swayed abruptly, his silhouette turning illusory once again. Emmy hurriedly increased its output in an attempt to stabilize him, but it realized that it could no longer help him. He had completely lost control and was crying out in panic. Yunyang was anxious as well. Helpless, he channeled the endless divine art to old Dugu's body with all his might. However, even Emmy's air of vitality was futile. Yunyang's shallow cultivation base of the endless divine art was futile as well. As the person directly involved, old Dugu naturally felt it as well. He smiled faintly and said, "Child, I've thought that when all of you have conquered the world and found yourselves wives and children, I would visit each family one by one and live my days in peace. It's a pity that this old man is destined not to be able to see it. When you find a wife and children in the future, don't forget to burn an incense to the heavens and tell this old man. Even if this old man is in the netherworld, I will drink to my heart's content." Yunyang said tearfully, "Of course. Remember to have more children." Old Dugu smiled warmly. "Your elder brothers did not leave behind any descendants. If you give birth to more, you can give it to them. The legacy of the 9 of you brothers, the legacy of your ancestors, all rests on you." Yunyang could only nod his head, completely speechless. However, he did not stop channeling his cultivation base, still hoping for a miracle to happen. "Child, you must live on." Old Dugu's body was slowly dissipating. "Don't be impulsive, don't force yourself. This old man has no regrets in dying this time. If you must leave with my corpse, this old man will die with everlasting regret if anything happens to you. Just let me stay here, what harm is there in that?" Yunyang was stunned. He finally stopped channeling his cultivation base because he knew that it was a fact that there was nothing he could do to turn the situation around. "Child, the cabbage and tofu are your favorite. Remember to use semicircular cabbage, the kind with a tightly wrapped heart. Peel off the outside and leave only the heart. For tofu, use soybean tofu, it's best if it doesn't budge when you press it. Use lard for stir-frying. When the oil is about to take shape, add in the spices. When the aroma of the spices begins to spread, add in the pork belly. When the pork color changes, add in the cabbage. Don't add water when the cabbage is not shrunken. When the pot boils, add in the tofu." He explained the cooking method of this dish seriously. "You love it the most. This old man would love to make another meal for you and watch you eat it. It's a pity that you can only make it yourself in the future." Old Dugu's gaze was filled with love as he looked at Yunyang greedily. "Child, live on. You must be well, you must be happy." The kind gaze was fixed on Yunyang's face as old Dugu's body turned into wisps of smoke. "Leave me, here, this old man can't protect you anymore. He stretched out his hand with great effort as if he wanted to touch Yun Yang's face, but his hand had already disappeared just as he stretched it out. Yun Yang hurriedly moved his face closer, however, the afterimage on the other side swayed in the air for a moment and then completely disappeared. At the same time, the last bit of warmth on old Dugu's chest was finally gone. His soul had gone to the 9 springs, not betraying the human realm. Emmy retracted its deific consciousness tiredly. Yun Yang stood there in a daze, feeling his mind go blank. He knew that old Dugu could have held on a little longer, but in order to extinguish his thoughts, he had used the last of his spiritual energy to dispel the last bit of vitality in his body, allowing himself to vanish completely from this world. Father, Yun Yang's trembling hands stretched out as if he wanted to hold on to the silhouette that had disappeared in the air, but he could only grab a handful of nothingness. The door opened. Jun Moyan was still standing at the door, his gaze even more complicated than before. Has old Dugu gone? Yun Yang still felt like his mind was filled with thunder and lightning, his mind was a complete blank. He actually did not hear what Jun Moyan was saying. He felt chills all over his body, his heart sinking. He suddenly felt like he was the only one left in this vast world. Looking around, there was only loneliness. His brothers had gone. Sister Yu had gone. After Sister Yu and Yun Zuyu, old Dugu had left as well. Yun Yang's last kin in this world was gone as well. He had left his life behind just like that. Yun Yang was already standing in front of his body, but he could not save his life. He had traveled tens of thousands of miles, crossed thousands of mountains and rivers, plotted and plotted, but in the end, this was the only ending he could get. He even had to give up on old Dugu's body due to the circumstances, unable to bury him in his hometown. Was he really going to give up and compromise? Yun Yang felt like his heart was about to explode, a wave of hysterical emotions surging within him. No, I will never give up. Chapter 423. Jun Moyan understood Yun Yang's feelings very well. After waiting in silence for a while, he said, "If you're mentally unstable, I'm afraid you'll have to stay here as well." Yun Yang stood up stiffly and said faintly, "I still have a lot of things to do. No one can make me stay, no one." He took out the mystical beast tendon from his spatial ring and wrapped old Dugu's body with the bedding on the bed, using the beast tendon to tie him up. His actions were meticulous, and careful. He was afraid that he might have exerted too much strength and caused his father pain. Jun Moyan watched his actions and said faintly, "I advise you to give up. If you want to take his body away so openly, you'll never be able to walk out of Zilong City." Yun Yang turned a deaf ear to him, wrapping old Dugu's body in circles and carrying it firmly on his back. He said coldly, "I've never done anything impulsive. I've always planned before I act. Even when I'm impulsive, I'll stop myself with logic. This time, however, I don't want to stop myself. I want to be impulsive for once, to be willful." Yun Yang said quietly, "Because this is old Dugu. I have to do this. Although he'd rather die than for me to do this, I have to do it." Yun Yang's eyes seemed to be burning with fire. "Unfortunately, I can't help you." Jun Moyan said, "I'm very sorry. I can only leave this place before you step out of the room. Not helping either side is the limit of what I can do." Yun Yang said indifferently, "You've done enough. I'm very grateful. If we meet again in the future, I'll return the favor." A smile appeared on Jun Moyan's face that was like an ice sculpture. "No need. Although I won't help you, I'll still fulfill the Medallion of Gratitude's request." As he finished speaking, he turned and left, a step ahead of Yun Yang. The moment Jun Moyan turned, a ball of mist burst from his eyes and disappeared immediately. Just as the tears formed, they were evaporated by mystical qi. "Old brother, you're leaving." Jun Moyan's expression was still cold as he thought to himself, "Allow me to send you off." Lan Wuxin and the rest were already anxious from the wait. Although they had seen Jun Moyan come and go, who dared to question him? Anyone could see that this man was obviously in a bad mood. He was in a very bad mood. If he was killed because he asked about the progress, that would be the greatest injustice in the world. The experts from the Four Seasons Tower, on the other hand, were glowing. Their gazes were focused on Jun Moyan, eager to give it a try. The #1 swordsman in the world. This was the legendary #1 swordsman in the world. If he could defeat or even kill him, how glorious would that be? It was a case of people disliking the former for the former's high status, and snatching the former's honor from the latter. It was a pity that Supreme Cloud's trap was here. No matter what, they had to prioritize getting rid of Supreme Cloud first. They would come after Jun Moyan after this was over. Hopefully, the unrivaled swordsman in the world would not be too far away by then. They had thought it through and were concerned about the bigger picture. Although they were delusional, they did not actually take action against Jun Moyan. It was such a waste of such a rare opportunity. Just as the Four Seasons Tower's people were feeling regretful, they saw Jun Moyan walk out with a sword in his hand. Jun Moyan walked out. As he walked, he actually came before the people from the Four Seasons Tower. His expression was cold as he spoke in a cold voice. "The four of you are from the Four Seasons Tower, aren't you?" The leader of the Four Seasons Tower's experts was already a seventh heaven expert. His cultivation base was higher than Venerable Lord Saber's. He was usually an arrogant, high-ranking figure who roamed the world. He snorted and said, "We are from the Four Seasons Tower." So what? His words did not seem to take the unrivaled swordsman's question to heart. He took it too seriously. Jun Moyan said faintly, "Let's confirm your identities first. Also, why didn't Mr. Nian come this time?" The Four Seasons Tower's expert spoke in a faint tone. "Why would our Supreme Lord need to come personally for such a small matter? I, Mu Ziqiu, will watch from here. Everything is enough." Jun Moyan's expression turned cold as he said, "What do you mean? Are you confident that you can deal with me?" Mu Ziqiu was stunned. He was obviously trying to find something to talk about. "Although I have the intention to deal with you, when did I say so?" However, the situation had already been set. If his personal behavior caused the situation to change, it would be entirely his responsibility. Mu Ziqiu chuckled dryly and said, "I didn't mean it that way." Jun Moyan snorted and said, "Didn't mean it that way? Did you really not mean it that way? Then when I came out just now, who was the murderous intent that you condensed directed at? I think it's not that you didn't mean it, but you have the intention but you don't have the guts." Jun Moyan was a swordsman, so he was most sensitive to all kinds of murderous intent and hostility. Naturally, he had sensed the Four Seasons Tower's desire to fight at once. Although they had retracted it immediately, he had the intention to provoke them. This was the best opportunity to do so. How could he miss it? As for the difference between battle intent, hostility, and murderous intent, strictly speaking, there was not much of a difference between the three. They all required the use of sabers and swords. Mu Ziqiu felt like his stomach was about to explode with rage. "What do you mean? You, Jun Moyan, may be the unrivaled swordsman in the world, but you can't bully others like this. If it wasn't for the fact that there was no room for change, did you really think your father would be afraid of you?" Mu Ziqiu suppressed his anger and said, "Brother Jun, you've misunderstood." Jun Moyan frowned. "What did you call me? Brother Jun?" He smirked coldly. "You're quite senior, aren't you? How dare you make me your equal? Are you trying to provoke me in broad daylight? If you want to go against me, just do it. There's no need to beat around the bush. Even a clay figurine would have a temper." What was more, Mu Ziqiu was also an all-powerful pinnacle expert and one of the Four Seasons Tower's magnates. He could no longer suppress his temper and said angrily, "If I don't call you Brother Jun, am I supposed to call you Lord Jun?" Jun Moyen snorted and said with a roll of his eyes, "You should call me Lord Jun. Even if Mr. Nien was here, he'd still call you Lord Jun." The 4 experts of the Four Seasons Tower had a change of expression at the same time. The murderous aura that they had initially restrained dissipated abruptly. Each of them had their hands on the handle of their weapons. Mu Ziqiu spoke in an unprecedentedly dangerous tone, "Please explain the meaning of this, great swordsman Jun, otherwise, it'll be terrible if there's any unpleasantness between us." Jun Moyen said faintly, "The Four Seasons Tower's rules aren't strict enough, allowing the 4 of you to embarrass yourselves and offend others. It's your own fault. It's only right that I teach you a lesson on behalf of Mr. Nien today. I'll let you know that not just anyone can be provoked. Especially when you actually dared to wield your swords in front of me. According to my rules, this is already a capital offense." Jun Moyen said, "Kneel down and slap yourself if you don't want to die. Apologize to me and repent to the sword." Mu Ziqiu and the others were now certain that this fellow had come out to look for trouble. He was looking for trouble on purpose. Creating something out of nothing and picking bones out of an egg was not as picky as he was. It was most likely that he had nowhere to vent his frustrations and had turned his attention to the 4 of them. The 4 Heaven Realm cultivators had actually been reduced to a punching bag for someone else. How could they not be infuriated? "Jun Moyen, what are you doing?" Mu Ziqiu's pupils shrunk. His dry and long fingers pressed tightly on the handle of his sword, gripping it tightly. As the words of caution left his mouth, Mu Ziqiu's mystical qi surged like a great river. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Even though Mu Ziqiu thought highly of himself, he still had no confidence in facing the world's unrivaled swordsman. Of course, at the same time, there was anticipation and confidence. He had been anticipating the battle with Jun Moyen, confident that he could defeat the latter. Even if he could not do it alone, he had the support of 3 experts. With the 4 of them working together, they should be able to take down the world's unrivaled swordsman. Jun Moyen chuckled. "Dare? What for? Do I f***ck? You're pretty confident, aren't you? Are you always getting screwed by others? Not only are you confident, you're also very capable. Why else would you provoke me? Being screwed by the world's unrivaled swordsman, it's a lifetime's glory, enough for you to brag about for the rest of your life." Mu Ziqiu felt an inexplicable rage rush to his brain. Without further ado, he hollered and attacked. The sword light had already turned into a rainbow that streaked across the sky, moving at an incredible speed. "How dare you attack me for real?" Jun Moyen hollered, "Brother Nien, let me lend you a hand. Set the rules for the Four Seasons Tower. When we meet again in the martial world, just treat me to a drink of gratitude." Jun Moyen's hand moved and his sword moved. As the sword light flashed, it was like a ray of white light that fell from the sky like the Milky Way. Then, another 4 beams of chilling light flew out. The extremely sharp sword energy enveloped the 4 men from the Four Seasons Tower in the sword light at the same time. The sword light was like a huge ball of light, dazzling and dazzling. When the people outside looked over, they were dazzled. The 4 men and Jun Moyen could no longer be seen. The sword light that Jun Moyen had unleashed was like the vault of heaven landing on the ground, airtight and without a single gap. The only sound that could be heard was the Four Seasons Tower's men's cries of shock and agony, coming from within the range of the sword light without a break. The 4 peerless experts in the eyes of the Empire of Zio were completely subdued by Jun Moyen. Lan Wuxia sucked in a cold breath at once. Was this the capability of the world's unrivaled swordsman? He had actually wanted to control such a person with the righteous cause of the country? As expected, it was wishful thinking and the ravings of a lunatic. Chapter 424. Lan Wuxia then remembered something. What was going on? Why were they fighting? It was just a disagreement. Did it have to be like this? Why did they have to fight here? This, what exactly is going on? They could not fight. At the very least, they couldn't fight here. With a loud bang, it seemed like two swords had collided. Then, a muffled groan seemed to come from the depths of someone's chest. A streak of blood suddenly broke through the cover of the sword light and suddenly rushed up to the sky. In the next moment, a silhouette stumbled and spun as he retreated. With each turn, there was more blood around him. Everyone was shocked to see that there were at least 100 wounds on that person's body, and blood was still spurting out from every wound. When that person staggered to his feet, his face was already as pale as snow. One of his hands trembled as he reached into his bosom, as if he wanted to take out some medicine to treat his injuries. However, he saw a sword light fly out from the fierce battle. With a crack, an arrow of blood shot out from the person's forehead. The blood was mixed with white brain matter, and it gave off steam. When it landed on the cold ground, it was a horrifying and soul-stirring sight. The person's action of retrieving the medicine was cut short. His pupils were unfocused as he fell to the sky, dead. The other 3 people who were still fighting in the sword light roared at the same time, their voices filled with grief and anger. In spite of this, none of them could escape. The sword light formed a complete light veil once again, like a prison that was imprisoning them. A moment later, another cry of agony could be heard. Another 4 Seasons Towers man had an arrow of blood spurting out from his throat as he fell in a crooked manner, landing on the ground like a broken sack. His body twitched once before he stopped breathing. It turned out that only those who had to die could leave the light veil. The moment they left was the moment of their death. A shrill voice rang out, "Jun Moyen, are you bent on going against the 4 Seasons Tower until one of us is dead?" His voice was full of threat, but the hidden meaning behind it, as well as the intention to beg for mercy, could be heard by everyone. So this was the strength of the number 1 swordsman in the world. Only after experiencing it for himself did he realize that the pinnacle of swordsmanship was actually so unreachable. The pinnacle wasn't something that could be climbed with mere imagination and confidence. However, the price of knowing this was too high. It was the price of his life. Jun Moyen's voice was so cold that it seemed to carry shards of ice. "If Mr. Nyen comes after me for killing a few pieces of material like you, Jun Moyen will accept it." This was confidence, the confidence of the number 1 swordsman in the world. Back then, Ling Xiaozui had slaughtered the 4 Seasons Tower for a long time. Mr. Nyen had the same ability as Ling Xiaozui, but he had waited until the very end to confront him personally. This was the fear between experts of the same level. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not engage in a life-and-death battle. It was the same for Ling Xiaozui and Jun Moyen. It would be a joke if Mr. Nyen sought out Jun Moyen for the sake of these people's lives. "There's no enmity between us. Why must you kill me?" The shrill cry was interspersed with a cry of agony. This is how the martial world's reputation and status come about. Do you think that the title of the world's number 1 swordsman is something that I've boasted about? Jun Moyen's words were slow and unhurried, but they were not directed at the people he was slaughtering. His words were directed at the empire of Zio's officials who were present. One should have his own dignity and demeanor when walking the martial world. If anyone dares to offend his dignity, he should be killed. This is the martial world's iron law. I, Jun Moyen, am the world's number 1 swordsman. Although I don't like the title of number 1 above my head, as long as it's on my head, I will defend it. Killing until no one dares to speak rudely in front of me is also a very difficult and not easy thing to accomplish. Jun Moyen's voice traveled into Lan Wuxin and the others' ears. Everyone shuddered subconsciously. Even though I have to swallow my anger for now due to various reasons, I will have to vent it eventually. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. Jun Moyen's voice was tinged with indifference. It was a disregard for human life, as if there was no one who could not be killed by his sword. If I don't vent my anger, how can my thoughts be at ease? When I set my mind on killing someone, no one in this world can escape my pursuit. Do you know that the reason the 4 of you died by my sword today is not only because you wanted to kill me, but also because you were impolite? Remember in your next life that no matter what you do, you must keep up appearances. Don't provoke someone you can't afford to provoke. Otherwise, you'll really lose your life. I don't like people who want to kill me and don't know when to back off. My sword doesn't like it either. When you don't know when to back off and start to feel regret, it'll be too late for regrets. Any profession, anyone, anything. Jun Moyan let out a long howl, all of you. 2 thunderous sword lights flew out at an extremely fast speed, and 2 heads flew up into the sky along with a spurt of blood. The 4 leading experts of the 4 Seasons Tower had been killed by Jun Moyan in less than the time it took for a joss stick to burn. None of them were spared. Jun Moyan lectured them while he killed. His words were filled with the principles of being a good person. Those who were familiar with Jun Moyan would realize that he had never spoken so much in one go in his entire life. In spite of this, Jun Moyan had never used his sword to kill because of a small killing intent, nor had he lectured others in such a manner. After all, Jun Moyan had been the unrivaled swordsman for too many years. If someone had coveted him or killed him just because of his hostility, or killing intent, the unrivaled swordsman would have long become the unrivaled killer. Lan Wuxia and the others, however, were pale. They felt like they were standing naked on the peak of a snowy mountain. The bone-chilling wind had frozen them into ice cubes. It was not just their bodies, their hearts and souls were cold as well. A politician could play with the public opinion to achieve his own goals. He could also make the experts who were looked up to in the martial world listen to his orders, making it easier for his own ambitions. However, after all these things were done, could the politicians really resist the revenge of these forces? Once extreme, how could a mere politician's means contend against it? Especially when some powers were simply unparalleled powers. There was no other way but to await death. At this moment, the 4 corpses were lying lifelessly on the ground. A moment ago, they were still all-powerful. But now, even an ant could bully them at will. It was a ghastly sight. Life and death are so simple, yet so complicated at the same time. Jun Moyan's robe was still whiter than snow. Although he had taken 4 lives, there was not a trace of blood on him. Looking at the corpses on the ground, he said faintly, "Great Chancellor Lan, do you know why these people dared to harbor murderous intent toward me? They were confident, and they had the right to be so. To reach where they are now, the first prerequisite is to possess the talent of 8 innately awakened chakras and above. Then, they must have good comprehension and the guidance of a master teacher. At the same time, they must study diligently and go through countless years of cultivation that would be worse than death. Then, they must have enough luck and the protection of a benefactor. Only then can they obtain many treasures of heaven and earth and countless opportunities of life and death." Jun Moyan said faintly, "Not a single one of these conditions can be omitted. Only by fulfilling so many stringent conditions can they live to this day and become the otherworldly experts and pinnacle experts in the eyes of the common people. It's evident that their opportunities are profound and their providence is rather high. It's a pity that they've used up their providence today. When they offended someone they shouldn't have, they've used up their providence. That's why they've all died by my sword." Lan Wuxian's vest was drenched in sweat. He could clearly feel Jun Moyan's rage and murderous intent. Moreover, this rage and killing intent was clearly directed at him. Chapter 425. Lan Wuxian was pale, but he held himself up, not allowing himself to collapse. He had been an official for many years, possessing an unshakable aura. Although he could not withstand Jun Moyan's murderous aura, he could still hold himself up. He said forcefully, "Perhaps one day, Senior Jun will offend someone you can't afford to offend because of something or someone and be punished. In this world, there will always be someone better than you. Don't you agree, Senior Jun? Jun Moyan guffawed and said, "That's right. This is the truth, how can it not be? It's just a pity that I haven't met someone who can punish me until now. If I do, I'll definitely report to Chancellor Lan that I, Jun Moyan, have met the person that Chancellor Lan hopes I'll meet, to make you happy." Lan Wuxin's face was even paler. The meaning behind Jun Moyan's words was as sharp as a sword. "If there's a day when I'm about to die, I'll drag you, Lan Wuxin, down with me before I die. We'll go to the netherworld together, laughing." Lan Wuxin suddenly felt an indescribable regret for forcing Jun Moyan under the guise of national justice. If he had known that Jun Moyan was such a lawless and powerful desperado, why would he have threatened him? Wasn't he just making things difficult for himself? Jun Moyan guffawed and recited leisurely, "One who roams the world, one sword in hand, Jun Moyan, ends the worldly affairs today, happy in the martial world." Before his words echoed in the air, he suddenly rose into the air, his white robe fluttering. Standing in midair, he said softly, "Brother, I'm leaving." Everyone heard the words, but they did not know who he was talking to. At this moment, however, they could see Jun Moyan's expression. It was sad and heavy. Jun Moyan stayed in the air for a long time, as if he was reminiscing about something, as if he was recalling something. Suddenly, a thunderous sword hum reverberated in the air. A ray of sword light shot up into the sky. It was only a flash, and Jun Moyan's handsome silhouette in white had disappeared without a trace. It was only then that Lan Wuxin broke out in cold sweat. His face turned waxy yellow, but he heaved a long sigh of relief in his heart. This malefic was finally gone. It's good that he's gone. As long as we don't use any excuses to oppress you or coerce you to do anything, we won't have any connection with each other, and we won't meet again. I sincerely hope that you, Jun Moyan, will never set foot in Zilong City ever again. It was then that Lan Wuxin realized that the door to the small yard had opened again. Elder Yun, who he had been looking forward to, walked out step by step. His expression was very strange, or rather, very odd. Elder Yun. Lan Wuxin felt an inexplicable sense of panic. His instinct to seek fortune and avoid danger prevented him from going forward. Instead, he took a few steps back and called out from afar, How are you?" Yun Yang heaved a long sigh and said, "The assassin's condition is not good. This old man's recovery of his soul has been effective, but his body is still broken. He's only hanging on by a thread now and won't die anytime soon. I need to bring him back for further treatment, or else, bring him back. Treat him properly." Lan Wuxin's eyes were as wide as they could be. "How could I let you bring it back? He's a national criminal. What we're asking for isn't to save that person's life, but the secret in his heart." On the other side, countless officials from the Empire of Zio were so shocked that their eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. What was going on? Why does it feel like there's something wrong with it? Lord Chancellor, be careful. The two guards of Lan Wuxin were top-notch experts as well. Out of a martial artist's instinct, they suddenly felt the sudden surge of murderous intent from Yun Yang. It was directed at Lan Wuxin. Both of them stood in front of Lan Wuxin, unsheathing their sabers and swords at the same time to defend against the sudden killing intent. The experts on the side reacted swiftly as well, filling in the gaps immediately and surrounding Lan Wuxin like an impenetrable fortress. Yun Yang had wanted to ambush Lan Wuxin and kill him in one fell swoop. If he succeeded, the entire Zio would be plunged into chaos. However, the other party's guards were alerted and the situation had changed. Yun Yang's manifestation powers were no longer in effect and most of his trump cards could not be unleashed. He could only give up on this great temptation and said faintly, "Even if it's a national criminal, we can only talk about the aftermath if he's alive." How can we interrogate him if he doesn't recover a little? In spite of this, the people who heard the explanation could still clearly feel that Elder Yun's words were unusually cold. It was a reasonable explanation, but why did it feel so insincere? Besides, you're carrying the assassin on your back. It's obvious that you're going to take him away even if you don't agree. Lan Wuxin stared at Yun Yang in a daze. Looking at his resolute, icy expression and eyes that were filled with murderous intent and rage, he felt his heart sink. He said hopelessly, you're not Feng Xiang'e. You're a spy. Lan Wuxin finally understood. However, this realization made him want to die. When he said these words, he almost wanted to vomit a mouthful of blood to relieve the frustration in his heart. Whenever he thought of how he had been acting like a grandson in front of this spy for so long, he felt extremely annoyed. In the end, the spy was he was the Empire of Zio's minister, second only to the emperor and above tens of thousands of people. How could he still have the face to face others after being fooled like this? If His Majesty the Emperor were to ask about this, how would he explain it? He had even given the imperial seal and the royal treasure to the other party, had allowed the enemy to enter the prison and had carried the assassin on his back. Yet, he had even greeted the enemy with a smile and kind words like an idiot. It was utterly humiliating. This was a humiliation that could never be washed away for the rest of his life. Even if he were to tear this person into pieces, this humiliating experience would definitely be recorded in the annals of history. An eternal infamy. Spat. Lan Wuxin spat a mouthful of blood as his wish came true. He cried out in a frenzy, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Arg!" Yun Yang looked at him strangely. "I thought you've always known who I am. Haven't you always called me Elder Yun? Don't you know who this old man is? Supreme Cloud. You're Supreme Cloud." Lan Wuxin's heart skipped a beat. Clarity flooded his mind as he suddenly cried out, "Kill him, kill him. Quick, kill him. He's Yun." Before he could finish his words, he spat out another mouthful of blood, and his old body fell backward onto the ground. Without waiting for Lan Wuxin's order, countless Zio experts had already appeared from all directions. There were also countless deicide archers appearing from higher ground. There were also many Four Seasons Towers experts lying in ambush. They had not dared to make a move when Jun Moyan had killed their brothers, but now, they had come out in full force, brimming with murderous intent. "Kill!" An earth-shattering voice boomed. Honestly, Yun Yang did not want to be so high-profile, he did not want to be exposed like this. He had countless ways to avoid such an exposure, to continue playing the role of Elder Yun/God of Wine/Feng Xiang'e, he had countless excuses to avoid such a massacre. However, he did not have a choice. Out of the thousands of options, he had chosen the most difficult and dangerous one. He could have kept old Dugu's remains into his spatial ring, but he did not do so. He felt like he was about to break down if he did not explode once more. Today, I choose to be willful. I must be willful. I need to go on a killing spree. Yun Yang told himself inwardly, even if I die, I have no regrets. At this moment, his heart was filled with tyrannical emotions, and he could no longer restrain himself. Countless experts from the Empire of Zio charged forward, coming closer and closer. The murderous intent in Yun Yang's eyes grew thicker. Finally, with a roar, he charged forward. Above him, arrows rained down like rain. On the opposite side, thousands of sabers and swords gleamed. Yun Yang, on the other hand, charged openly towards these thousands of people. "I'm going to charge out of the west gate with you. I'm going to bring you out of Zilong City, step by step. I'm going to bring you out the way you came in." Yun Yang roared, "Old Dugu, open your eyes and watch." With a flash of saber light, the 17 experts in front of him were split into two halves with a swoosh. Blood soared into the sky as Yun Yang charged into the densely packed crowd like a bolt of lightning. With a flick of his hand, a Zio expert's machete slipped from his hand and landed in Yun Yang's. The saber light shone brightly, like snow falling from the 9 heavens. Lan Wuxin had already been rescued to the side and was watching the battle with his mouth agape. Yun Yang's open and unrestrained fighting style, his valiant stance of fighting 1,000 enemies alone. A sense of devastation rose within him. He didn't expect that a single person's battle would give off the feeling of an army of thousands and thousands of men and horses facing each other. In the blink of an eye, Yun Yang had already charged thousands of feet away, leaving a trail of corpses along the way. Not a single one was left alive. The long-handled glaive in his hand was 24 feet long, he had snatched it from the very beginning. Using the divine edge could allow him to unleash his ability more perfectly, but Yun Yang did not feel satisfied. He might as well just grab a broadsword and kill his way out of the encirclement. With a clang, a sword clashed with the glaive. The sword-wielding person was sent flying with blood gushing from his mouth while Yun Yang spun and used the momentum to spin, cutting more than 30 people in half at the waist. With a loud thud, the saber's hilt was planted on the ground. With a loud boom, a wave of air rippled outwards and dozens of people were flung into the air from the impact. Yun Yang used the force of the impact to soar into the air, crossing hundreds of feet like a flying man and landing directly among the royal guards who had rushed over upon hearing the news. With a wave of his saber, a wave of crimson light soared into the sky. From afar, the Empire of Zio's crown prince's pale face stared fixedly at Yun Yang who was slaughtering among the royal guards. He looked as if his soul had left his body. Isn't that Elder Yun? Why are our own people fighting each other? Lan Wuxin's exasperated roar came from his side, stop him, kill him. This is Yutong's supreme cloud. Chapter 426. Yutong's supreme cloud. It would have been better if he had not said it. Lan Wuxin's sudden words had stirred a commotion, it was earth-shattering. Supreme cloud? The only remaining supreme cloud of the 9 supremes, the supreme cloud who had never shown himself in front of anyone, had actually come? Furthermore, his combat power was so formidable. Countless veterans who had been on the battlefield felt their scalps tingle upon hearing the name, as if they had seen the nightmares of their nightmares resurfacing. The earth dragons churning, the wind dragons howling, the fire dragons devouring the sky, the golden light and the vast waves seemed to appear before their eyes once more. They could not help the chill that sent chills down their spines as they instinctively turned back to focus their attention. In spite of this, Yun Yang had already landed in the crowd like a bolt of lightning with boundless murderous intent. The deicide archers could only temporarily stop firing their deicide arrows. The people where Yun Yang was standing were too densely packed. If they were to fire now, other than accidentally killing their own people, it would not affect Supreme Cloud at all. There was a flash of cold light as a sword slithered out from the crowd like a venomous snake that had been lurking for a long time. Its target was Yun Yang's abdomen. Yun Yang snorted coldly and spun abruptly. As the dazzling saber light brought up a row of heads, the hilt of the saber collided with the tip of the incoming sword. The person who had attacked Yun Yang was a 4 Seasons Tower expert hidden in the crowd. The moment the saber and sword collided, the person felt his hands go numb, he could no longer hold on to the hilt of the sword. The long sword bounced back forcefully. As the blade cracked inch by inch, the hilt of the sword crashed into his own chest like a 1,000-caddy hammer. The person spat out a mouthful of blood from the backlash of his own sword hilt. He fell limply to the ground, drowning in the crowd. Countless footsteps and horse hooves landed on him, trampling over him. In the blink of an eye, he had turned into a pile of flesh and blood. The Empire of Zio's army was not lacking in experts and there were more and more reinforcements coming, but no one could stop Yun Yang for even a second. Yun Yang guffawed, his saber growing sharper, like a flood dragon diving into the sea or a phoenix dancing in the firmament. Wherever he passed, heads rolled and blood splashed. The empire of Zio's army did not lack experts and reinforcements were increasing in number, but no one could stop Yunyang for even a second. Right now, Yunyang was like a large ship that was sailing against the wind and waves, leaving behind a mountain of corpses and a river of blood. Seeing that Supreme Cloud was getting more and more ferocious as he killed, everyone from the empire of Zio was filled with awe. Fierce. Too ferocious. Yutong's Supreme Cloud was so ferocious that it chilled one's heart and made one despair. They had only heard of Yutong's 9 Supremes' ability to control the battle formation, but they knew that the 9 Supremes were not valiant warriors who charged into the battlefield. But right now, what was going on? This was far too different from the impression they had received from the intelligence. However, he was only one person. Facing the entire city's army, even if he could fight, where could he go? From here to the West City Gate, there was still a distance of more than 20 kilometers. Do you really want to fight your way through? Even if the army stood still and let you kill them one by one, could you kill them all? It looked like Supreme Cloud had gone mad. The rumored supreme think tank of the 9 Supremes did not live up to his name. He was obviously a brave man who tried to show off his bravery. Apparently, everyone had forgotten, or perhaps overlooked, that it was this courageous man who had deceived Zio's prime minister, Zio's emperor, Zio's higher-ups, and even the entire empire of Zio. If such a person really went crazy, the number of people buried with him would truly be an astronomical figure. Along the way, there were constantly experts falling from the sky into the battle ring. Then, in the next moment, their flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Only a few black-clothed men hid in the crowd and moved with the army, but they did not attack. What should we do? Let's wait a little longer. Let's wait and see before we act. It's not a solution to forcefully attack now. There's still a long way to go before we reach the West City Gate. Let's wait for Zio's soldiers to deplete some of Supreme Cloud's energy before we strike. We'll finish the battle in one swift strike. There's no need to take the risk now. Brilliant. Let's do it this way. These people were the Four Seasons Tower's experts. They too expressed their helplessness with their current choices. It was true that they were the Four Seasons Tower's sniper team that specifically targeted Supreme Cloud, and it was also true that each of them was an expert. There were also quite a number of people present, these were all facts. The combined ability of the Four Seasons Tower's sniper team would be a pinnacle force that could not be underestimated, no matter where they were placed in the world. It was undeniable. However, it was also a fact that the situation was stronger than the people. The highest cultivation base among them was only at the 3rd heaven realm, and there were only 2 of them, while the rest were only at the 1st or 2nd heaven level. If this force were to be seen in Tianxian continent's secular perspective, it would be overwhelming. Each of them was a superb expert who was above 10th perfection. With such a lineup, they could even challenge Ling Xiaozue, could they not? In spite of this, it was impossible. Forget Ling Xiaozue, they dared not even make a move against Supreme Cloud before them. At this moment, after witnessing Yun Yang's unstoppable aura, these knowledgeable fellows felt their scalps tingle. The 2/3 celestial layer experts pondered for a moment. If they went over now, if they were lucky, they could become people flying in the air. If they were unlucky, the chi activity between the high-level cultivators would attract and it was very likely that the other party would kill them directly. There were only 4 people in the Four Seasons Tower who could restrain Yun Yang's current insanity. The 4 of them had just died in Jun Moyan's hands out of the blue. Therefore, the current situation left them speechless. When Jun Moyan killed them, this group of people had already blended into the crowd, but they dared not move at all. They dared not make any reckless moves at that time. What if Jun Moyan thought that they were in cahoots? What was more, they were in cahoots. They stayed where they were, watching as their comrades and superiors were killed, while they hid like turtles. That kind of feeling was indescribable. They could only be aggrieved. If they did not want to be aggrieved, they would have to die. Now that Jun Moyan had finally left and there was light at the end of the tunnel, Yutong's supreme cloud had appeared out of nowhere. When they first heard the news, these people were overjoyed. Joy was written all over their faces. Their superiors were gone, and their cultivation base was the highest. Would this not be a huge credit to them? Legend had it that the 9 Supremes were proficient in their manifestation powers, but their cultivation base was trash. Now that Zilong City was controlled by the spiritual restraining formation, the manifestation powers were all gone. If Supreme Cloud were to show himself, would that not be a suicide mission? Then, just as they were prepared to fight and claim the credit, they realized that legend was just a legend. The credibility was too low. Was this cultivation base trash? If this cultivation base was trash, what were they? So, I still don't dare to move. There was no need to mention the feeling of being wronged again and again. Yunyang brandished his 24-feet-long glaive into a huge circle of light and charged forward like a mad tiger. Yunyang did not know how many people he had killed, nor did he know that when he was killing, there was an inexplicable aura surging into his body. He only had one thought now, one thought: Father, watch me. I'll avenge you. I'll bring you and kill our way out of Zilong City's west gate. Father, if you leave, I'll let countless people accompany you. We'll go to the underworld together, hand in hand. Since they've done such a thing, I'll make them pay the price. In Lan Wuxian's residence. In the small courtyard. A cute little bear with a small green snake coiled around its arm slipped out sneakily and sprinted towards the place where the battle had taken place. 2 white silhouettes flashed in the air. With a loud bang, the glaive in Yunyang's hand was split into 2 halves. The saber had collided with countless weapons along the way, finally reaching the point where it could no longer bear the burden. His saber is broken. He's done for. Quick! Kill him! Kill! Chapter 427. Everyone's ears were filled with excited shouts. Countless people rushed forward with bloodshot eyes. There were also many people who left their backs wide open and simply used their bodies as weapons. They opened their arms wide and pounced forward. 2 black silhouettes floated up, following closely behind the warriors who were attacking with their lives, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Supreme Cloud's weapon has been destroyed, so his combat power will be greatly reduced. Furthermore, there are countless Zio soldiers who are sacrificing their lives to hold him back. Most importantly, Supreme Cloud doesn't seem to have noticed our actions at all. He's fully focused on the battle now, his back facing us. Everything is in our favor. We can strike now, a thunderous blow, and finish the job in one fell swoop. As far as the eye could see, the people closest to Yunyang were almost about to grab him in their arms. At this moment, everyone held their breath subconsciously. In a battle of tens of thousands of soldiers, as long as the enemy got close, they would be entangled like a human pyramid. When it came to that point, even if the person involved was immensely capable, he would only be chopped into minced meat. Those who were closest to Yunyang let out a loud roar and were about to hug him when their vision darkened. It was as if something strange had happened. Bang, 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 7 to 8 people crashed into a pillar at the same time. Lifting their heads, their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Oh my God! What was going on? Isn't our target Supreme Cloud? Why did this determined collision end up crashing into the thigh of an incomparably large black bear? This black bear's body was thick, and it seemed to be at least 100 feet tall. Those 2 legs were like pillars that supported the heavens. 4 or 5 experts collided head-on with them like ants trying to shake a tree. That black bear didn't even budge an inch. Instead, it was those people who were sent flying dizzily. With a roar, the black bear's paw that was like the crown of a tree came crashing down. Boom! A large hole appeared on the ground where the bear paw landed. The hole was filled with flesh and blood, but there was no trace of a human figure to be seen. What a domineering bear paw! The black bear did not stop after its successful strike. With a loud roar, it turned and dashed forward, appearing in front of Yun Yang in an instant. The sudden appearance of this incomparably huge monster immediately caused a wave of exclamations. What is that? Fire! Fire! Where's the deicide arrow? Hurry up and kill it! The Zhou soldiers' wish was beautiful, but the reality was harsh. The deicide archers did not dare to release their arrows because Supreme Cloud was too densely packed. The black bear's appearance was too sudden. How could they react in time? The black bear barged its way through the crowd, rampaging without fear. Yun Yang, who was following behind it, actually had no room to fight at the moment. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere the black bear passed. From time to time, a group of people would be sent flying like flowers scattered by a celestial maiden. Miserable cries shook the heavens and the earth. This black bear that seemed to have appeared out of thin air shocked everyone present. What was going on? How could such a huge creature appear out of nowhere? On the roof of a nearby building, several young boys and girls were watching this scene with trembling bodies. Although all of them were pale with fright, they still widened their eyes as if they had seen a ghost. They didn't even dare to blink. This isn't Elder Yun. A young boy's teeth were chattering. This bear, could it be that adorable little bear? A girl beside him was pale, her face drained of all color. Another girl was holding a cute squirrel in her arms, staring down with a dull gaze, as if she had been sucked dry. Elder Yun, Supreme Cloud? Supreme Cloud of Yutong's 9 Supremes? How is this possible? The young boys and girls were bewildered. Then, they realized that they were really doomed this time. It was because of them that this murderous star could enter Zilong City so smoothly. Now that such a huge commotion had happened, even national treasures like the Imperial Jade Seal and the stellar constellation had been given away. Someone had to shoulder the responsibility for everything that had happened. Obviously, His Majesty the Emperor would not do so, so they could only shoulder the responsibility. Yet, the source of this incident had to be them. When they thought like this, all the boys and girls instantly felt their vision turn pitch black, and their lives actually became boring. The black bear growled in a frenzied manner. His face was full of excitement as he continued to charge forward. This was his first battle with his master, so he had to show off his skills and show the stinky snake on his arm that it couldn't be compared to him. They weren't on the same level at all. Swoosh, 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 suddenly, the entire sky turned dark. Countless god-slaying arrows covered the entire sky in an instant. It was like a torrential downpour, pouring down from all directions. With a whooshing sound, the only target was the yellow bear's majestic body. It was not that the deicide archers did not want to shoot Yun Yang directly, but this fellow was too big of a target. They did not even need to aim, and this fellow was so savage. The archers thought in unison, they would first get rid of this accomplice and then kill Supreme Cloud. They believed that Supreme Cloud, who had lost this aid and his manifestation powers, was destined to fall here, no matter how strong he was. Swoosh, 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 the indestructible deicide arrows hit the yellow bear almost without missing, but the sound of the arrows hitting the bear was different. They bounced off like they had been beaten. It was as if the deicide arrows that claimed to be able to kill gods were completely useless. The deicide archers, Fang Qing, had succeeded. They were extremely confident in their deicide arrows. Even a 10th perfection pinnacle cultivator would not be able to avoid being attacked by so many deicide arrows at the same time. Even if the giant bear was a top-notch mystical beast, it should have perished under this rain of arrows. Who would have thought that the black bear would be unscathed after the rain of arrows? The group felt their blood run cold. How could this be? How could this happen? Are we in a nightmare? Actually, it was not that the deicide arrows were not powerful. Just as the archers had judged, if the one who had been hit by this round of arrows was an expert in perfection of the peak realm, he would have been severely injured even if he did not die. However, the Niello bear was a top-notch mystical beast in the Tianxian continent and was known for its defensive ability. Its skin and flesh were sturdier than beginner heaven realm experts. It was not something that the deicide arrows could penetrate. Furthermore, when the Niello bear was struck by the arrow, the fool actually felt the pain as well. With an angry roar, it stamped its foot on the ground. Immediately, a circle of yellow light spread out rapidly. Wherever the yellow light passed, the ground cracked and crumbled. Countless pieces of soil and debris flew into the air, and the buildings on both sides of the road collapsed with a loud rumble. In an instant it was a scene of devastation. Amidst the smoke and dust, countless cries of agony could be heard. The Niello bear was the first to charge forward and start a massacre. Yunyang followed behind it, but he did not even have the chance to use the saber in his hand. Honestly, Yunyang had not expected Blackie to be so helpful. He had only wanted the Niello bear to assist him in the battle and provide some assistance. After all, he was charging into the formation alone, facing a group of enemies alone. The deicide arrows had long traumatized Yunyang. Now, it seemed that Blackie was actually fearless of the deicide arrows and had turned the tide of the battle. Suddenly, the sound of a horn came from afar. Other than the majestic and melodious tone, there was also an indescribable sense of mournfulness, filled with the scent of bloodlust. The rumbling of the horn resounded as the soldiers retreated in an orderly manner. They did not even leave their corpses behind. All that was left was a pool of blood that could not be taken away. It was evident how elite Zio's army was. Yunyang's face was expressionless, devoid of sorrow or joy. His body was like a willow leaf as he followed closely behind the Niello bear, charging forward at a constant pace. He knew what was about to happen. Once such a heavy and mournful sound of weapons rang out on the battlefield, it meant that the enemy's heavily armored cavalry had come out. Chapter 428. The rider was covered from head to toe in heavy armor, leaving only his eyes exposed. The horse, on the other hand, was blindfolded as well. The blindfold was a piece of cloth, obviously a temporary measure to prevent the horse from panicking when it saw the ferocious beast in front of it. Amidst the sonorous sound of the horn, the rumbling grew faster and faster, gradually becoming as fast as lightning and as loud as thunder. Charge! The order was not given by the enemy, but by Yunyang. Even when faced with the enemy's indestructible heavily armored cavalry, Yunyang had never thought of retreating. Perhaps, he had never thought of retreating or evading today. No matter who it was, or what the situation was, he would charge headfirst into it. As the saying goes, I will not turn back until I hit the wall. Today, I, Yunyang, will not turn back even if I hit the wall. I'd like to see if I'll end up with my head bleeding and dying, or if the wall will be knocked down and broken into pieces by me. As a top-notch mystical beast, the Niello bear naturally had its own intellect. It also knew how powerful it was. With a sudden earth-shattering roar, its advance speed suddenly increased. The entire bear turned into a ray of yellow light, going against the flow and charging towards the heavily armored cavalry. The opposing cavalry howled at the same time. Seeing that the mystical beast was charging towards them, they urged their horses forward and increased their speed. Their 25 feet long, heavily armored spears were pointed forward. At the same time, the 500 men roared in unison, "Kill!" Boom! The Niello bear's massive body crashed into the formation of the heavily armored cavalry with the force of a mountain. The tremor was earth-shattering, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Not only were the dozens of cavalrymen at the front sent flying along with their steeds, a huge crack had also appeared in the formation of the heavily armored cavalry due to the extreme impact. However, the Niello bear also let out a muffled roar, its eyes glinting fiercely. However, there was also blood flowing from the corner of its mouth. It took a step back and its momentum was forcibly halted. It was obvious that Zio's military had seen through Old Hei's weakness and had adopted the most direct and effective method, which was to use human lives to forcefully suppress Old Hei's charge. If the Niello bear had really sped up, with the combination of its strength, weight, and speed, it would have formed an unstoppable momentum. Perhaps, it could have charged out of the west gate in one go. As Old Black's charge was thwarted, a forest of long spears flew over from all directions. If it was a rain of arrows just now, it was now a forest of spears. Although Old Black's momentum had been thwarted, his injuries weren't that serious. He didn't seem to care about the forest of spears at all as he continued to attack the remaining heavy cavalry in front of him. His attack was, of course, incisive. With a casual swipe of his paw, at least one of the heavily armored cavalrymen would be sent flying. However, the advantage of the heavily armored cavalrymen was on full display at this point. They had a strong defense. Even when faced with a top-notch mystical beast's fearsome bear paw, the heavily armored cavalrymen could still preserve their lives temporarily despite their inability to attack. With just these 500 heavily armored cavalrymen, they could at least trap the Niello bear for the time it takes to brew a pot of tea or even longer. Yun Yang's thoughts raced as he stole a glance amidst the chaos, only to see a burly general standing on a high point. His eyes were like an eagle's as he steadily issued orders. The messenger's flag and the bugle horn sounded at the same time. The heavily armored cavalrymen who were engaged in battle changed their formation at the command, moving those who were too severely injured to fight to the periphery. Other than those who were killed by Old Black's slap, many of the heavily injured did not die from their injuries as fresh troops joined in. If this situation continued, no matter how ferocious Old Black was, there would be a time when he would be exhausted. When he ran out of breath, that would be the moment of his end. How could Yun Yang allow his wishful thinking to come to fruition? With a flick of his wrist, the divine edge reappeared with a long howl. With a flash of light, Yun Yang charged into the heavily armored cavalryman's camp like a wisp of smoke. Where the saber light passed, another 3 armored cavalrymen and their horses were cut into 6 sections. With a turn of his body, another 20 or so horses' legs were severed neatly along with the saber light. Amidst the cacophony of men and horses, Yun Yang charged forward with long strides. The dazzling saber light that encircled him was truly magnificent. Every enemy soldier that stood in his way fell one by one as he charged forward. When they charged forward in droves, they became corpses left behind by Yun Yang. This was the way of killing. The heavily armored cavalrymen were best at winning with brute force, their defense was invincible. As long as it was not a fatal blow, the enemy would be trapped. For example, the Niello bear was domineering and its single attack power was stronger than Yun Yang's, but it was like scratching an itch against the heavily armored cavalry. Although Yun Yang could not use his manifestation powers, with the divine edge in his hand, there was nothing in this world that could not be stopped. Even the heavy armor of the heavily armored cavalry could not withstand a casual slash from the divine edge. Naturally, those who stood in his way were defeated and the casualties were heavy. Yun Yang's expression remained cold and unwavering, his gaze as cold as the dead. He was like the Shura of the underworld who had suddenly descended to the mortal realm to reap the lives of others. When he was at his fastest speed, a gray mist could be seen rising from his surroundings and entering Yun Yang's body. As Yun Yang went on a killing spree, the Niello bear managed to catch its breath and roared again. It was obvious that it was dissatisfied that it had been defeated and even besieged. It charged forward in a frenzy to fight alongside Yun Yang. One man and one bear, one sharp and one strong, working together was unstoppable. Seeing that the heavily armored cavalrymen could no longer fight back and the so-called natural defense line was about to crumble, Yunyang suddenly felt a piercing pain in his deific consciousness. At the same time, the yellow bear roared into the sky in agony without warning. Yunyang perked up and looked over with a solemn gaze. He knew that the empire of Zio's true experts had finally made their appearance after this intense battle. Far away, an elder holding his chest stood shakily on a horse. His face was pale and there was a faint trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He had never expected the other party's deific consciousness to be so powerful. His deific consciousness attack, which had always been successful, had only just come into contact with the other's deific consciousness. There was not even a feeling of collision between the two deific consciousnesses. Why had he suddenly suffered a backlash? This was completely different from the deific consciousness attack that he had encountered in the past. The feeling was like a small river crashing into the ocean, completely futile. Had the ocean completely swallowed the small river with a reversal of the tide and an impact? The elder was shocked as he struggled to speak. The other party's deific consciousness is extremely powerful. Don't use any form of deific consciousness attack. Otherwise, you'll be seeking your own death. Before he finished speaking, his voice was still echoing in his ears. The old man fell down from the back of the horse, unconscious. Around him was a group of people of all shapes and sizes. At this moment, everyone's faces were filled with shock. The unconscious elder was no saint. He was nicknamed the Soul Destroyer, specializing in deific consciousness and deific consciousness. He was best at manipulating deific consciousness attacks. Even if he encountered an opponent whose cultivation base was 3 or 4 levels higher than his, the myriad web would still suffer a great loss due to carelessness when the opponent's cultivation base was unknown to him. In the field of deific consciousness attacks, this elder was an expert and had always been successful. However, at this moment, the opponent clearly did not set up any defense in this aspect. It was a surprise attack. Facing the soul-destroying blade's divine sense attack, he actually suffered a great loss. This was not only incredible, it was hard to imagine, it was simply horrifying, okay? Could it be that the other party's deific consciousness was so powerful that his inadvertent counterattack could be so incisive? Looking at Yunyang, who was still charging forward in the crowd, everyone's heart skipped a beat. Yutong's Supreme Cloud, he's Supreme Cloud indeed. He lives up to his reputation, he's truly remarkable. Someone sighed in a low voice. Now that things have come to this, we can only launch a destructive attack on his physical body. Our overall ability is always superior. Let's attack together. Chapter 429. The group of experts nodded silently, their expressions complicated. These ace cultivators of Zio had planned to let the army take on the attack head-on, so that they could exhaust Yutong's Supreme Cloud's strength. They could also witness Supreme Cloud's techniques so that they could take him down in one fell swoop with a targeted attack. The Soul Crusher Blade had even decided to launch a deific consciousness attack. He was an expert in deific consciousness attacks. Rumor had it that Supreme Cloud did not have a high cultivation base other than possessing various manifestation powers. A cultivator's deific consciousness was directly linked to their cultivation base, so the deific consciousness should be Supreme Cloud's Achilles heel. Attacking this point would yield miraculous results. The Soul Crusher Blade had even planned for everyone to launch a deific consciousness attack at the same time. If Yunyang's deific consciousness was really his weakness, there was a high chance that the group would destroy Yunyang's deific consciousness in one fell swoop. Like old Dugu, his deific consciousness scattered and his soul incomplete, he would be doomed eternally. Unexpectedly, the yellow bear's sudden appearance at the start of the battle had messed up the originally set pace. The heavy armored cavalry had finally suppressed the black bear's rampage at the cost of human lives. In addition, Yunyang's sharp saber had reaped the lives of the heavy armored cavalrymen. The man and the bear had already established their dominance. If the group did not make a move now, they might not be able to stop them. However, the Soul Crusher blade had been severely injured just as it was unleashed. The only information it had obtained was that Yun Yang's deific consciousness was unexpectedly strong. A deific consciousness attack would only bring about one's own destruction. The established strategy had been foiled, and they could only fight with their weapons. At this moment, the group was cursing the Four Seasons Tower in their hearts. F***ck, what a scam. Look at the Four Seasons Tower, how can they be so unreliable? Someone cursed out loud. Isn't that so? Didn't the Four Seasons Tower send more than 20 experts? They're usually arrogant and boastful, but where are they now? Where have they gone? Didn't they just want to kill Supreme Cloud? Someone said in dissatisfaction. Their 4 leaders are the weirdest. F***ck, they haven't even seen the mastermind yet and they've gone to fight Jun Moyen to the death, only to be killed. Aren't they just 4 bastards? Why did you provoke Jun Moyen for no reason? He was the unrivaled swordsman in the world, someone who could compete with Ling Xiaozue. Didn't you see that they occupied the Board of Justice in Zio's capital city? Even His Majesty didn't let out a peep. That's right, that's right. As long as one is sensible, there's no one who doesn't know what's important and what's not. Those 4 fellows are the epitome of incompetent spoilers. Even if they killed Supreme Cloud before going after Jun Moyen, it would have been fine. Look at them now, they've left this strong man behind for us. Everyone had a belly full of resentment, and it was as if they were about to rush out of the sky. One could not blame these cultivators for being so resentful. Just by looking at Lord Supreme Cloud's momentum, they already knew that even if they managed to keep Lord Supreme Cloud here in the end, at least half of them would have to lie on the ground with him and be buried in the ground. Let's go to the netherworld hand in hand. However, it was too late to say anything now. The Four Seasons Tower's men were not here, so they could only go up to replace them. Charge! A low growl came from someone's mouth. The group unsheathed their sabers and swords instinctively, brandishing their weapons as they charged forward. Suddenly, Yun Yang felt the pressure on him increase tremendously. However, Yun Yang's heart that had been hanging in the air was relieved instead. According to the current situation, the worst-case scenario that he had expected did not happen. Not only was the Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian not here, many high-level cultivators were also not here. Otherwise, Mr. Nian or the Four Seasons Tower's high-level cultivators would have appeared long ago and taken action to eliminate him, eliminating any potential threat. Only Mr. Nian and the Four Seasons Tower's hidden experts were qualified to pose a threat to his life. The people before him were merely mediocre, so the pressure they felt was only multiplied. They were nothing to be worried about. On the other side, the general was still commanding calmly, arranging his troops in a disciplined manner. He watched as Yun Yang's saber light pierced through layers of defense, but he was still calm and composed. One after another, large nets fell from the sky. Countless hidden weapons completely covered the space in front of Yun Yang, coming at him from all directions. There were also countless sabers, swords, spears, tripping ropes, and countless traps. So many setups had been set up in a short period of time, each with its own purpose and purpose. The entire setup was flawless, without any loopholes. There was still a cacophony of people shouting and horses neighing from afar. The rumbling of the army was coming from other directions, rushing over here. The majestic sound of the bugle horn rang out continuously. It was deafening and soul-stirring. However, Yun Yang turned a deaf ear to all of this. One man and one saber, all who stood in his way would be defeated. There was only the stubborn thought in his heart that had not changed at all. He wanted to kill his way out from here, step by step, out of Zilong City. He wanted to knock down this wall. Beside him, the Niello Bear's roar was getting more and more furious, but it was also getting weaker and weaker. It could not be helped. Although the Niello bear was a top-notch mystical beast, the king of beasts, it was still only at the 9th level after all. There was a limit to its power. Charging all the way until now, it had expended a lot of energy. It had been hit by countless deicide arrows and slashes, and there was also the forceful obstruction from the heavy armored cavalry. Even someone as strong as Blackie was gradually losing its strength. The bear's paw was already fatigued as it rose and fell, especially the defense on its body. It could no longer completely defend against the deicide arrows. Hundreds of deicide arrows had already pierced into its majestic body, dripping with blood as it moved. This was only because of the unique physique of a top-notch mystical beast that it could still sustain for a period of time. Otherwise, it would have been completely exhausted. Yunyang frowned and said, "No need to force yourself. Retreat. Shrink." If Yunyang had previously thought of using Blackie and Little Green as cannon fodder, it was no longer in his mind now. Instead, he really treated Blackie and Little Green as his own people. With Yunyang's protective nature, he would naturally not allow the Niello bear to die here. When the Niello bear heard this, it was as if it had been granted amnesty. It immediately took a step back and its huge body suddenly shrunk several times, turning into a miniature bear. But this way, the arrows on its body were even more densely packed together, making the little bear look like a porcupine. Yunyang waved his hand. A small green snake suddenly flew out, followed by a flash of green light. What followed was a series of cries of terror. A gigantic python suddenly appeared on the street. It was more than 300 feet long and as thick as a house. When it opened its mouth, it was as big as a city gate. As soon as it appeared and charged forward, the deterrence it formed was even greater than Ol Black's. Especially the wind blades that were constantly shooting out of the snake's mouth. It was simply a huge natural machine gun with off-the-charts lethality. The wind blades condensed by the green snake were an innate ability and did not belong to the natural order of nature. Therefore, they were not restricted by the spiritual restraining array. As it rushed forward, it spewed out wind blades at the same time. It was invincible and indomitable. What was more terrifying was that when a certain snake occasionally opened its mouth, what it spewed out might not necessarily be a wind blade. It might suddenly spit out a mouthful of venom, which could corrode flesh and corrode bones. Of course, the giant snake's attack would not cause much trouble to the true experts, but to ordinary soldiers, it was an absolutely lethal attack. Yunyang, who was behind it, was not in a hurry to act. Instead, his hand turned into a swift shadow. Within a few breaths, the countless deicide arrows on the Niello bear's body had all been plucked out by him. However, a large chunk of flesh that was hooked by the deicide arrows had been torn off as well. The Niello bear howled at the sky, almost fainting from the pain. Yunyang's move was only to remove the arrows as quickly as he could, there was no special technique involved. The agony that Blackie had to endure was, of course, excruciating. However, Yunyang already had a plan in mind. With a backhand slap, a ball of air of vitality entered the bear's mouth. The Niello bear, who was in tears from the pain, quickly absorbed the good stuff that had entered its mouth. For a moment, joy and sorrow welled up in its heart. The python in front had already charged no less than 1,000 feet away, behind it was a pile of corpses. Chapter 430. Moments later, a few silhouettes shot through the air, their approach different from that of ordinary soldiers. It was obvious that Zio's experts had made their move. Yunyang snorted and sprung up, his saber light shining brightly, merciless saber, red dust manifested. With Yunyang's current cultivation base, the Destiny Blade was just a small demonstration. Cultivators below the Heaven Realm would not be able to withstand a single blow from him. With the appearance of blood, 3 silhouettes grunted and fell back, dead or alive. Yunyang spun around and struck merciless blade again. Another 2 people grunted and retreated. They were already forced into a corner and were about to die. Suddenly, there was an eerie silence in front of him. Then, the sound of gears clattering could be heard. Yunyang's pupils shrank as he saw a giant arrow flying towards him. A siege arrow. A siege arrow? Such an arrow was a special arrow that was specifically used to attack cities. The entire arrow was basically a mystical iron arrowhead attached to the front of an ironwood tree trunk. However, to fire such a unique arrow, at least 8 cultivators of the 4th peak and above were needed to draw the bow, and another 2 people were needed to load the arrow before it could be fired. In other words, at least 10 cultivators were needed to work together to successfully wield such a bow. However, this kind of siege arrow was extremely powerful. If an arrow was shot and hit the city gate, it would definitely blast a big hole in the gate. Even if it only hit the thick city wall, it would still shoot straight in, leaving half of the arrow outside, making it easier for the soldiers to use it to attack the city. The power of such an arrow was indestructible. However, such an arrow was actually used against one person today. The person involved was truly honored. Facing the siege arrow that was coming at him with such speed, Yunyang dared not face it head-on despite his cultivation base being in the heaven realm. He dodged and the siege arrow brushed past him, but the whistling of the wind caused by it caused Yunyang to pause for a moment. Not only did the 2 experts who had been forced into a corner escape from the saber's attack, they had also closed in on Yunyang, slashing at him with their saber and sword in unison. Yunyang's body swayed as he evaded his opponent's killing blow. At the same time, he executed Destiny Blade, saber later. The 2 men who had just escaped death felt the gleam of the saber again, but they could not see where the saber was or where the target was. Their hearts chilled as hopelessness surged within them once more. Yunyang snorted angrily, but he was still only halfway through his attack. He had no choice but to stop and dodge, causing the 2 giant arrows to miss their target once more. Although Yunyang had successfully avoided the 3 siege arrows, the Moor python beneath him did not have the agility to dodge. The 3 siege arrows, 1 in front and 2 at the back, all pierced into the Moor python's body. The 3 arrow wounds on the giant serpent's body couldn't be suppressed. Blood gushed out like a river. It spasmed painfully and hissed. In the distance, in all directions, there were thunderbolt bows that were used to attack cities. The angles of each thunderbolt bow were different, obviously designed to target Yunyang's escape from different directions. Yunyang hollered and patted the Moor python on the ground, motioning for it to shrink its body so that he could save it. Unexpectedly, the Moor python could no longer shrink back to its small size due to its severe injuries. At the same time, the densely packed crowd of enemies charged forward. The Moor python had wreaked havoc on the soldiers earlier and they had no way to defend themselves. Now that the Moor python was in danger, the soldiers saw an opportunity to attack as a group. With a loud cry, Yunyang sprung up and charged forward like an arrowhead. At the same time, his feet kicked out continuously. The 3 siege arrows were pulled out from the Moor python's body. Then, a large ball of spiritual chi of vitality was sent into the Moor python's mouth. The Niello bear, whose combat power had recovered, roared as it slaughtered Zio's soldiers, guarding the Moor python. It was only until the Moor python's injuries were healed by the spiritual chi of vitality and it had the strength to turn back into its original snake form that it charged forward and reunited with Yunyang once more. Yunyang calculated in his heart. After the Moor python had the assistance of the thunderbolt bows, both the Niello bear and the Moor python would not be of much help to him. The best way to unleash their combat power was to revert to their original forms. However, both of them were too big and the targets were too obvious. He did not even need to aim properly to be sure that he would be able to hit his target. Even top-notch mystical beasts like Blackie and Little Green would be done for if they were hit by a dozen arrows consecutively. Therefore, it was better to fight with himself as the main force next. The siege bolts were still fired consecutively without a care for the cost. Above, below, left, and right, they were surrounded by enemies. There were obstacles everywhere, causing Yunyang's speed of advancement to be much slower than before. At this moment, the Four Seasons Tower's experts, who were hiding among the crowd, finally made their move. From time to time, there were flashes of sword light and saber light that resembled venomous snakes. It was obvious that these people had a clear understanding of Yunyang's ability. They left immediately upon contact, never lingering to fight. Yet, such a fighting method was the one that troubled Yunyang the most. Initially, Yunyang had thought that after Jun Moyan had dealt with the Four Seasons Towers for Heaven Realm Ace cultivators, none of the remaining people would be a match for him in a one-on-one fight. Even if a dozen of them came at him together and attacked him, he was confident that he could win. However, they left immediately upon contact, never taking the risk and hoping for a fluke. They were constantly hidden among the crowd, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. It was indeed a huge problem. This was also the situation that Yunyang was most unwilling to face. At this time, the Empire of Zio's experts had also realized the benefits of such a fighting method. Immediately, they imitated it as if they had been enlightened. Yunyang's saber light flashed, clearing the area around him as he advanced several feet forward. However, those people had already disappeared into the newly charged soldiers. They did not care about the lives of the ordinary soldiers, only hiding their tracks behind these people, intentionally maintaining their elusive state. Although it was despicable and immoral, it was undeniable that this was the most effective and targeted way of fighting at the moment. Yunyang grew increasingly anxious. Old Dugu's thin body was on his back. Yunyang seemed to feel that old Dugu's eyes were still open, watching everything that was happening before him. Yunyang's emotions calmed down like ice and snow at that moment. My father is still waiting for me to bring him out, to bring him home. I can't be impatient, I can't panic, I can't lose my composure. I can be angry, I can vent, I can fight, but I can't lose my composure. At this moment, another siege arrow came swooping in his direction. It was still as powerful as before. As Yunyang flashed past it, his eyes suddenly shone. Swoosh, 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 countless deicide arrows were fired continuously from the top of the walls on both sides. Yunyang evaded them continuously, his body flashing like a phantom as he advanced another 500 feet forward. It was at this moment that the unique sound of the siege arrow rang out once more. This time, it was 3 arrows that flew in a triangular formation, sealing off the space where Yunyang could evade. Yunyang let out a long howl, exhaling the foul air in his chest. He bent over and spun around. As the siege arrow flew past his face, he stretched out his hand and played with the tail of the arrow skillfully. Although it was only a simple flick, the strong impact from the contact made Yunyang's fingers feel like they had been electrocuted. In spite of this, the impact was minimal. The siege arrow that Yunyang had manipulated did not lose its momentum. It made a strange turn and turned around. Yunyang slapped the tail of the arrow and the siege arrow flew out with a swoosh, leveraging the force of the arrow to strike back. This time, the siege arrow actually flew back with a whoosh, much faster than the speed at which it had come. Chapter 431. Yunyang's maneuver of leveraging the enemy's force was undoubtedly ingenious, and the result was stunning as well. With a loud boom, the siege arrow that Yunyang had deflected returned to where it came from. The thunderbolt bow that was at its original spot exploded immediately, while the soldiers beside it were covered in blood from the explosion. Zio's soldiers were terrified, never expecting that there would be someone in this world who could deflect the siege arrow. This was not just a miracle, it was a miracle. Once Yunyang's attack was successful, he began to attempt to control the direction of the siege arrow. He did not expect it to return to where it came from. All he wanted was to deflect it and attack the thunderbolt bow or even an enemy at a certain spot. It was a pity that it was useless no matter how well Yun Yang planned it. This place was not his turf after all. It was impossible for him to unleash his full potential. The general who was commanding the battle from a faraway vantage point was definitely a rare genius. He had extended his limited military strength infinitely, constantly changing his formation, allowing the soldiers with mediocre cultivation base and combat strength to be unleashed in an efficient manner that was several times more effective. More importantly, he had perfectly coordinated the rhythm of the attacks from the bow, cavalry, infantry, and ballista, aiming each wave of attack at Yun Yang's most difficult moment. This was not the end of it. What was rare and also what gave Yun Yang the most headache was that he had even coordinated the martial world and the military to work together to surround the enemy. It was done seamlessly. A commander like this did not need to have a high cultivation base, not even a mystical chi cultivation base above intermediate level. As long as he had a strategic vision, his command alone was enough to make up for the gap in ability between his side and the ace cultivators in the battle. This battle was the proof of real combat. As Zio's reinforcements increased in number, the commander's efficiency increased as they swarmed in like a swarm of bees. As a result, the pressure that Yun Yang had to endure and feel was growing exponentially. Yun Yang regained his clarity of mind. Despite the danger of the war and the unprecedented danger, he was still unhurried and unruffled. He maintained his stance of charging forward step by step, but he felt the resistance growing stronger, each step more difficult than the one before it. The feeling of sinking into mud became clearer and clearer, more and more real. Yun Yang was still full of energy. His cultivation base had improved and he, who had entered the heaven realm, could replenish his chi much faster than before. In addition, the enemies he was currently facing did not consume too much of his mystical chi, and he had Emi's spiritual chi as support. There was no worry at all. Even so, it was an indisputable fact that Yun Yang's speed was slowing down. It was irreversible. At this moment, a sonorous voice rang out from afar, "Lord Supreme Cloud, the situation is clear now. Even if you grow wings, you won't be able to break out of our tight encirclement. Why don't you surrender now so that everyone can preserve some dignity?" Yun Yang snorted faintly. The other party's actions were obviously not to persuade them to surrender, but to encourage their own people. In particular, they pointed out that Supreme Cloud could no longer escape and defined it as a fact, greatly boosting their morale. After all, the unstoppable aura that Yun Yang had displayed earlier was too frightening. Not many people were unperturbed. Now, once the fact that Supreme Cloud was fated to not be able to escape was put on the table, everyone would be reassured. He could no longer escape. What they had to consider next was how to render meritorious service and how to do so. Such a method to boost morale was simple and direct. It was a battlefield nightmare to one of the 9 Supremes to surrender. It could be said to be a milestone for them to surrender. Yun Yang said faintly, "This general's strategic command is very methodical. You should be Zio's famed general. May I know your name?" Even in the midst of the noisy army, Yun Yang's voice was steady and carried far away. There was not the slightest hint of anger, but everyone along the way could hear him clearly as if his voice had entered everyone's ears automatically. Everyone felt as if Supreme Cloud was talking to them face to face. Their expressions changed at once. This level of cultivation wasn't just shocking, it was simply horrifying. There were also those who pondered further. Supreme Cloud's ability to speak in such a calm tone in the midst of such a fierce battle meant that his vitality had not been damaged. In other words, he was still in perfect condition and had not even fought with all his might. Was the claim that Supreme Cloud would surely be defeated in this battle just a wild fantasy? Was it a pipe dream? At least, it was not so optimistic. The general's steady voice rang out, this lowly general is extremely honored to be praised so highly by Lord Supreme Cloud. This lowly general, Ding Yunlu, greets Lord Supreme Cloud. Yun Yang said faintly, so it's the renowned Zio general, Ding Yunlu. You're not bad. Your strategic command is even better than the rumors. However, it's wishful thinking to keep me here with the capability you've displayed so far. Ding Yunlu said, whether it's wishful thinking or not, we'll know soon enough. Yun Yang replied in a low voice, that's right, we'll know soon enough. As he spoke, Yun Yang advanced another 200 feet forward. Yun Yang was now drenched in blood. In a battlefield like this, it was a joke to say that he could avoid the blood and remain untainted by even a speck of dust. What a joke! Under the dumbfounded gaze of the Zio general, Zio's archenemy, Supreme Cloud, suddenly soared into the sky amidst the onslaught, rising to an altitude of 70 to 80 feet before he turned and sprinted in the air. His speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, he was already no less than 1,000 feet away. When one was outnumbered, the biggest taboo for the besieged was to move without his feet touching the ground because it would cause him to be unable to borrow strength. Once he was injured, his condition would only deteriorate further. Yun Yang was currently in such a situation. No matter how Ding Yunlu had racked his brains to come up with a strategy, he had never expected Supreme Cloud to take such a risk and move in the air. In spite of this, Yun Yang's action had a great advantage: he was fast. Too fast. Once he was allowed to charge close to the city gate and leave the heaven and earth cage that was Zilong City, even an army of 10 million would not be able to find a single strand of his hair. Quick! Archers! Ding Yunlu was shocked and ordered decisively, shoot indiscriminately. The semaphore officer felt a jolt in his heart, almost dropping his flag on the ground. He paused for a moment before signaling. Yun Yang was in the air now and he was moving extremely fast. It was difficult for the deicide archers to lock on to him. Once they missed, the arrows would inevitably cause friendly fire when they landed. In addition, this was an uncontrollable variable. Instead of that, it was better to shoot face to face. After all, the latter could still determine where the arrows would land and avoid friendly fire as much as possible. Whether or not Supreme Cloud would be harmed after the order was given was still uncertain, but the number of friendly fire casualties on their side would be massive. In spite of this, killing Supreme Cloud was the top priority at the moment. Even if there was a huge risk of loss, they had to take the risk. Following the command, Zio's deicide archers released tens of thousands of arrows, covering the sky with a rain of arrows. Yun Yang's silhouette in the air was like an afterimage, but this afterimage was followed by a huge tail. No matter where he flew to, there would always be arrows trailing behind him. The consequence of such a situation was that as long as Yun Yang bent his body, the arrows would fall into the crowd due to their original shooting trajectory. Cries of agony could be heard and a considerable number of casualties would be caused. Then, a new row of arrows formed another long tail and continued to chase after Yun Yang. Listening to the cries of his comrades caused by his order and looking at the changing battle situation, Ding Yunlu gritted his teeth, the flesh on his cheeks twitching. His eyes were bloodshot as well. I don't believe that his mystical chi will never run out and that he can keep flying in the sky. Ding Yunlu spat hatefully. After all, to a normal cultivator's knowledge, flying in the air for such a long period of time like Yun Yang's was definitely something that would greatly damage a cultivator's vitality. The mystical chi reserve that could last for 6 hours on the ground could only last for a quarter of an hour or even less if it was to fly intensely in the air. Therefore, Ding Yunlu decided to take a gamble. He was betting that Supreme Cloud's mystical chi could not last for too long. For this outcome, he was willing to pay the price of thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of casualties. After all, once Supreme Cloud escaped, the damage he would cause would be 100 times greater than the loss of 100,000 soldiers. Even the entire country would fall and perish because of this devil's departure. No matter how painful and unbearable it was now, for the sake of a long-term plan and future peace and joy, he had to endure this agony until this devil was killed. When the time comes, I, Ding Yunlu, shall visit the families of all the fallen brothers today and kowtow to each and every one of them. Even if I have to go bankrupt, I'll raise your children to become talents. If I go against this vow, I shall be forsaken by both man and God. Ding Yunlu swore in a frenzy and then issued a cold-blooded order, "Don't stop the arrows." As the order was issued, the bloody tears in his eyes finally spilled out uncontrollably. Yun Yang's gaze was like lightning, overflowing with endless indifference and mockery. "You want to compete in mystical qi consumption with me? As you wish, let us continue playing." Chapter 432. It was difficult for cultivators to maintain their qi for long. This was a law that no cultivator could go against. Even those as strong as Mr. Nian, Ling Xiaozue, and Jun Moyan could only hold on for a slightly longer time. Even with Yun Yang's beginner heaven realm cultivation base, the endless divine art and Emi support would not be able to sustain him for too long. Just based on this alone, Ding Yunlu's chance of winning the bet was very high. At most, a few more soldiers would die, but they would be able to last until Yun Yang ran out of energy. However, the prerequisite for such a situation was that Yun Yang would be alone without any assistance. Now, under the long hem of his green robe, Whitey Two's tiny body was carrying Yun Yang as they sped away. As a supreme mystical beast, Whitey Two could fly for 2 hours even if it was carrying Yun Yang, as long as it did not provide mystical qi for an important battle. When Whitey Two was tired, there was Whitey Three to take over and continue flying. The time Whitey Three spent working was enough for Whitey Two to recover. After all, Yun Yang had an endless supply of life force in his hands. He only needed to give Whitey Two a ball of it and he could revive it on the spot. Therefore, to compete with Yun Yang in a battle of attrition, endurance was akin to seeking one's own death. Yun Yang had concealed Whitey Two's tiny body flawlessly, not giving himself away at all. What he needed now was to create such an illusion for the enemy. "What you guys are doing is exactly what I want." The rain of arrows continued. Yun Yang stuck close to the crowd, his saber flashing brilliantly. He had adopted the fighting method of Zio's experts earlier. He would leave immediately upon contact, never lingering to fight. However, with each swing of his saber, there were a few people who screamed and fell to the ground, dead. Faced with such a situation, the Four Seasons Towers experts and the Empire of Zio's urgently mobilized 10th level perfection experts did not dare show their faces at all. If they were to jump out at this time and in such a state, it would be equivalent to fighting Yun Yang alone. No one had the confidence or ability to defeat Supreme Cloud, who was like a god of war. There was no one among his subordinates who could withstand a single blow. The entire city was filled with their own troops, while the other party was only a single person. However, the millions of soldiers on their side were completely helpless, and it was as if they were being slaughtered by a single person. The deicide arrows and siege arrows shuttled back and forth, attacking without any regard for the consequences, but the only result they got in return was a huge number of casualties on their side. There were even a few high-ranking generals who died tragically under the sniper arrows of their own side. 15 minutes. It had already been 15 minutes. This was the entire Xian Qi reserve of a cultivator at the first heaven. Even a 10th perfection grandmaster would not be able to do it. Ding Yunlu's eyes were bloodshot as he stared fixedly at Supreme Cloud, who was still flying low in the air, praying in his heart. "You can't hold on any longer, right? Drop it. Drop it quickly. You can't hold on any longer. Hurry up and fall. No matter what, your Xian Qi is about to reach its limit, right?" It was a pity that Yun Yang did not respond to his curse at all. He was still flying back and forth freely, no less agile than before. On the contrary, it seemed to have become more agile. Then, an hour passed, Supreme Cloud was still flying in the air, more agile than before. His saber light glinted menacingly, showing no signs of fatigue. The Empire of Zio's casualties had already exceeded 10,000 men. This was undoubtedly a huge number, and it was also an unbearable number of losses. The other party was only one person, there was only one person. That person was not even in his best condition, his greatest support was no longer with him. Despite this, he had still caused such a terrifying number of casualties on their side. Such losses were unimaginable and unbelievable. The moment Ding Yunlu, who was in a daze, snapped back to reality, he looked behind him. His legs were unsteady and he was about to fall. The other party's goal had been clear from the beginning, he had clearly expressed his intention to charge out from the west gate. Throughout the journey, he had never changed his direction. Now, he had advanced too far. Each time the other party made a move, the experts of the suicide squad behind him had to use their own bodies and lives to smash the other party back. Charge back. Smash back. In spite of this, at least 30 to 40 experts of the 7th peak and above had to be sacrificed for each interception. Up until now, there had been 17 interception attempts. The experts that he had gathered behind him had been reduced from the initial 500 men to the last group of 30 men. A total of 500 ace cultivators were thrown in just like that. The outcome of their interception at the cost of their lives was only to temporarily hold Supreme Cloud back. They did not even manage to inflict the slightest bit of damage on him. But that wasn't all. What Ding Yunlu found the most unacceptable and incomprehensible was that, not only was his opponent not injured, he didn't even look the slightest bit tired. He was still advancing step by step. Had he advanced another 1,500 feet? The truth was hopeless. Ding Yunlu's heart was already in complete despair. He could totally imagine what he would have to face after this battle. Even if Supreme Cloud was annihilated in the end of this battle, the blame that he would have to bear would not be small. The Empire had lost so many of its core forces, someone had to step up and take responsibility. As the person directly involved and the commander, he could not find a replacement even if he wanted to. From the beginning of the battle until now, he had gone from brimming with confidence to feeling cold all over, his heart was filled with despair. His declaration that Supreme Cloud would surely die and fall here had turned out to be nothing more than a joke. Was he the one who had been dreaming? Did the Empire of Zio not have any experts? No. Back then, the Empire of Zio's celestial stone had fallen into the hands of the founding emperor. For decades, the celestial stone had been in the palace, continuously emitting a copious amount of energy. During that period of time, the people around the Empire of Zio's imperial city, especially the newborn infants, had all benefited greatly from the magical aura. The benefits had even extended to the bloodline, the benefits were endless. It was also from that time onwards that the Empire of Zio's martial force was unparalleled in the world. Throughout the entire Tianxian continent, no other country could have more experts than the Empire of Zio. It was just that these seedlings had disappeared one after another, not appearing among the people. It was because these people had been recruited by the noble families to guard their homes and become their private soldiers. They did not fight for the country. Now that the empire was in a precarious situation, those who came out to fight were still the common faces. Not a single true expert from the noble families had appeared. Watching countless imperial soldiers being slaughtered, watching the enemy flaunt their prowess here, yet the nobles of the empire were still watching coldly from the sidelines. How could one not be saddened? The strangest thing was that the palace's superior combat force had not come to help since the start of the battle. Ding Yunlu's sorrow flowed like a river. Was this battle not related to the fate of the nation? Was this battle not related to Zio's fate and the lives of his family? Retreat, spread out, don't let the crowd get too dense. Ding Yunlu commanded the deicide archers as he issued orders, all long-range attackers, occupy the highest point. Deicide bows, keep shooting, don't stop. Siege archers, maintain the current firing rate, don't stop. Ding Yunlu's heart was about to explode. Supreme Cloud, how long can you stay in the air? Are you still human? Why are you not doing anything? Is he really a devil? This was the question in the hearts of all the people from the empire of Xiao. It was as if the other party was weightless, hovering in the air for such a long time, carefree and at ease. In such a unique state, none of their attacks could pose a threat to him. Everyone was asking the same question: where are the Empire of Xiao's experts? Does the Empire of Xiao not have an expert who can stop this fiend? A supreme cloud was flying around in the air, going on a killing spree, his murderous aura filling the air. With Yunyang as the bait to attract most of the enemy's firepower, Old Black and Little Green also went on a killing spree on the ground. Wherever they passed, people were thrown off their feet. Ding Yunlu was even more bewildered. The two mystical beasts had been severely injured earlier and they were about to be killed. How could they have such combat power now? He arranged his troops at once to encircle the two beasts again. Ding Yunlu's thoughts were clear. He knew that killing the two mystical beasts was the most important thing right now. If he were to ignore them, there might be more variables. However, what made Ding Yunlu feel even more hopeless was that when Xiao's soldiers finally managed to severely injure the two mystical beasts again, Supreme Cloud flew past them and the two mystical beasts regained their vigor. Their injuries seemed to have healed in an instant, and they looked even more ferocious. Everyone understood now that Supreme Cloud must have some kind of mystical skill that could revive the two beasts from the brink of death. Was there any meaning in continuing this battle? When would it end? Everyone instinctively had an extremely pessimistic thought: they had no chance of winning this battle. Perhaps, this nightmare could only end when Supreme Cloud charged out of the west gate. Stop him? It looked like they could not stop him anymore. Did they not see that the other party was getting more and more relaxed? He no longer looked like he was in a hurry to leave. The other party's actions were obviously toying with their hundreds of thousands of Xiao soldiers. God, are we all in the middle of a horrible nightmare? Will we be devoured by the nightmare in the end? Will we all be slaughtered by one person? Is this Supreme Cloud a human or a demon? Chapter 433. Xiao's soldiers were on the verge of breaking down. Tens of thousands of arrows shot through the air again and again, an indiscriminate, wide-area attack. The enemy would either flick his sleeves and charge forward in a straight line with his face shielded, using his dense mystical chi to break through the dense rain of arrows, or he would evade and charge higher, moving more than 300 feet away in an instant. Even when tens of thousands of arrows were fired at the same time, he could still easily avoid them. Then, he would land and continue his massacre of Xiao's soldiers. As for the tens of thousands of arrows that flew past, they did not simply fall to the ground, they would continue to unleash their destructive power, targeting the comrades who were pursuing Yunyang from behind. They were falling row by row. This had happened more than a dozen times. Xiao's strategy had not changed, and the enemy had not suffered any casualties. Now, the area behind Supreme Cloud had basically become a no-man's land. No one dared to stay there. No one dared to attack Supreme Cloud's back. As long as they stood there, they would be greeted by tens of thousands of arrows from their comrades in the very next moment. Behind Supreme Cloud was the forbidden zone of death, trespassers would die. This knowledge was implanted into the minds, hearts, and consciousness of everyone present. What a warrior! In a tall building far away, Xiao's emperor, who was dressed in bright yellow, stood by the window and watched the battle, sighing with a serious expression. "Old He, are you confident? His Majesty asked the old eunuch beside him. The old eunuch frowned and said, if we were to measure the opponent's true capability based on the length of time he could hover in the air, as well as the fact that he's always been at ease, I'm not his opponent. But, the opponent seemed to be at most a second celestial layer cultivator. According to common sense, staying in the air for a quarter of an hour was already the limit. But now, for some reason, he actually stayed in the air for as long as 2 hours? This point was incomprehensible. At the same time, it makes it difficult for this old servant to assess his capability. His Majesty said with a dark expression, but it's not a solution if we continue to suffer casualties like this. Zio's emperor was obviously urging Old He to make a move. Old He frowned awkwardly and stood up slowly, saying, Your Majesty, this battle is extremely dangerous. I'm afraid we'll need at least 10 of the palace's reverends to ensure victory. His Majesty glanced at him coldly. Old He did not speak further, the atmosphere was cold. His Majesty pondered for a moment and said faintly, Reverends, 10 is fine. However, pass on my decree to the 5 noble families' higher-ups. Every family has to assist. In his eyes, a trace of deep anger flashed. Even at such a critical moment, those families still refused to lend a helping hand. His Majesty was thoroughly enraged. Could it be that this world belongs to me alone? If Supreme Cloud really managed to escape unscathed, would all of you be able to survive? Yun and of the Beast and Whitey were aware of the entire process. Yun White and Whitey of all of it. Yun Yang suddenly felt Whitey Two's weakness beneath his feet. Not daring to delay, he issued an order immediately and soared into the sky. Whitey Two turned into a beam of white light and landed in Yun Yang's pocket. Only Yun Yang and Whitey Two knew what was going on during the entire process. It was impossible for the outside world to see through it. Yun Yang patted casually and a ball of green entered Whitey Two's tiny body. Whitey Two breathed a sigh of relief while Whitey Three appeared energetically and burrowed into Yun Yang's crotch. Seeing another ball of green appear in the sky, a sense of helplessness and despair rose in all the Zio soldiers' hearts once more. It had been the same the previous few times. The bear and the snake had been beaten half to death and were on the brink of annihilation. Supreme Cloud had rushed down and sent out a ball of green energy. No one knew what it was at first, but the 2 mystical beasts' combat strength had been restored immediately. Not only that, even their heavily injured bodies were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. They had regained their flesh and bones, resurrecting the dead. That was all there was to it. Now that the green had appeared again, did it mean that Supreme Cloud's combat power had returned to its peak? Was the nightmare going to continue? Was it going to develop in an even darker direction? Yun Yang had the upper hand now. Everything was within his grasp, so he still had the time to release his deific consciousness to sense the atmosphere around him in case of emergency. It was also because of this that he noticed a tall, slender figure standing on the roof of a building far away. She was looking over at them with anxiety written all over her face. It was Shangguan Lingxiu. Shangguan Lingxiu's hand gripped the hilt of her sword tightly. There were a few veterans beside her who looked like they had been through hundreds of battles, all of them looking impatient. Below them, there were another 200 people who had already readied themselves for battle, ready to fight. In spite of this, Shangguan Lingxiu did not give the order to attack and assist Yun Yang. This was because Shangguan Lingxiu knew that if she and her 200 subordinates were to join in the current battle atmosphere, not only would they be of no help, they would only be adding 200 lives to the battle. What was more, he might even become a burden to Supreme Cloud. Zio's commander, Ding Yunlu, was a famous general of Zio. Shangguan Lingxiu could foresee that if she were to join the battle hastily, Ding Yunlu would even order Zio's army not to kill them. He would only torture them to lure Supreme Cloud to help. Therefore, she wanted to help, but she dared not do so. We have to do something. We have to do our part. Shangguan Lingxiu's brows were tightly knitted together. However, how should they do it? What should they do? Yun Yang had no clue at all. How could he not see Shangguan Lingxiu's restlessness with his deific consciousness? With a sudden thought, he howled into the sky, "Ding Yunlu, do you know who's the one talking nonsense now? Who's the frog in the well? Your knowledge is shallow, how can you know the vastness of the world? I, Yutong's supreme cloud, entered Zilong City's west gate and will exit from the west gate as well. Even if the Empire of Zio has millions of troops, what can you do to me? Do you think you can stop me?" The sudden laughter shook the sky and the earth, intimidating the tens of thousands of Zio's soldiers on the spot. Their morale plummeted. Ding Yunlu was at his wits' end. It was not that he did not want to boost the morale, but his declaration just now had been utterly ruined. It had become a complete joke. He really did not know what he should say now. What else could he say? Shangguan Lingxiu, who was standing on the other end of the line, suddenly understood what she should do now. "Let's go." Shangguan Lingxiu leaped down. "To the west gate." Shangguan Lingxiu's expression was resolute. "Let's go to the west gate and receive Lord Supreme Cloud." "Yes." The group answered in unison. One of them said hesitantly, "Of course we should help Lord Supreme Cloud, but we're lucky to have entered Zilong City this time. If we leave now, I'm afraid Lord Wudi's remains will." Shangguan Lingxiu's pretty face twitched. This was an unavoidable question, and a difficult choice to make. As long as they left this place this time, retrieving their ancestors' remains the next time would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. Perhaps, there would not be a second chance at all. Besides, the enemy's military force was deployed to guard against Supreme Cloud this time, giving her the opportunity. If they gave up this time, in addition to her leading the men to seize the West Gate and help Supreme Cloud, they would definitely become mortal enemies with the Empire of Zio. There would be no room for negotiation. Zio's simplest and most direct revenge on the Shangguan family of generals would be nothing more than the destruction of their ancestors' remains. This was something that could almost be foreseen and confirmed. It would be the Shangguan family of generals' greatest regret. There would never be a day of fulfillment. However, she only hesitated for a moment before she made up her mind and said, "The war is dangerous now. I have to make a choice. Ancestor Wudi will understand my difficulties. If I don't go and Supreme Cloud falls here, it'll be a matter of Yutong's demise. As for Ancestor Wudi, it's a matter of the Shangguan family of generals alone. What's more important will be decided in a glance. Let's take care of the living people in front of us first and talk about the rest later. Let's go." Shangguan Lingxiu led her people and left quietly from the side. Just as she, or rather, Yun Yang, had expected, all of Zilong City's forces and attention were focused on the never-before-seen battle of the century against Supreme Cloud in the city. No one noticed their departure. Shangguan Lingxiu turned to glance at the shrine of General Wudi one last time before she turned and left, never looking back. The building that Shangguan Lingxiu had left was constructed like a sword that pierced the heavens, glowing with a blinding golden light. The Shrine of Wudi. This was the shrine that enshrined the Shangguan family of generals' ancestor, Shangguan Wudi. The Empire of Zio had been impressed by the fact that he was a hero of his generation and had built a shrine specifically for him. The remains of Shangguan Wudi's family of 3 were enshrined in this shrine. Watching Shangguan Lingxiu disappear, Yun Yang could not be sure if she had really understood what he meant. However, seeing that the invincible ancestral hall was not far away from him, a thought flashed across Yun Yang's mind. Just as Yun Yang was about to put his idea into action, a long howl came from afar. A voice called out, "Supreme Cloud! How dare you wreak havoc in my Zio? Do you think there's no one in Zio?" Amidst the howl, a silhouette dressed in black turned into a dazzling sword light and flew over like a bolt of lightning from afar. The sword light was pointed at Yun Yang. At this point, the opponent's true expert had finally revealed himself. Yunyang guffawed. The empire of Zio's ace cultivators are nothing more than this. I've killed no less than tens of thousands of people up until now. It's only now that your superior force is willing to show up. What right do you have to talk about being the empire of Yutong's enemy? Unless self-preservation and self-importance can become a wake-up call to the world. Yunyang's words reverberated in the air. Everyone who heard it could not help but feel their hearts skip a beat. Ding Yunlu, who was commanding the battle, was overwhelmed with mixed feelings and was at a loss for a moment. These words actually came out of the enemy's mouth, and it made him feel even more like a blow to the head. Putting oneself first was another way of saying that one was selfish? A wake-up call? A wake-up call to the world. Ding Yunlu mumbled to himself, that's right. He's only willing to come out when almost all of them are dead. He's obviously using the bodies of ordinary soldiers to deplete Supreme Cloud's stamina and mystical chi. What right do they have to be the empire of Yutong's enemy if they have such a temperament and such behavior, including Zio's royalty? The source of this battle is only the fall of an unknown person from the empire of Yutong. Supreme Cloud traveled tens of thousands of miles to rescue him personally, disregarding the risk and cost. He risked his life and went through a series of bloody battles. The Shengguan family of generals' remains are here, but their generations of descendants have never forgotten it and are determined to avenge it. What kind of cohesiveness do they have? On the other hand, what are we on Zio's side? Do we really not have the right to be their enemy? The more Ding Yunlu thought about it, the more he felt that he was right, the more despair he felt. Under the accumulation of negative emotions, his expression changed abruptly, turning pale. With a loud cry, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His tall and straight body swayed and swayed. The person in the air sneered, "Young one, you are full of nonsense. Let's see what right this old man has to be your enemy." The person and the sword arrived as soon as the voice arrived. Yunyang snorted coldly. With a flash, he swung his saber. Merciless blade. A brilliant saber light appeared, colliding with the incoming sword light from the side. However, the moment the saber light and sword energy came into contact, the attacker spun around, avoiding the merciless saber's counterattack with ease. The sword light surged abruptly, its splendor sweeping like a tidal wave. Supreme Cloud, you're nothing more than this. Yunyang's gaze was as calm as ice. With a backhand, he attacked with merciless Dao again. Unexpectedly, the person's sword light was like the waves of the Yangtze River, surging endlessly. Although Yunyang had managed to nullify 3 waves of attacks, merciless Dao had been parried by this person. Yunyang's heart tensed up, his guard up. He had already sensed it from the contact just now. The other party was a great cultivator at the pinnacle of the third heaven realm. His cultivation base was 2 whole levels higher than his own. This was secondary. The other party actually had the ability to parry the first 2 forms of his saber truth, Destiny Blade, and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. This was extremely commendable. Since Yunyang's debut and cultivation of saber truth, Destiny Blade, there had never been anyone who could parry it so calmly. Even Venerable Lord Saber and Venerable Lord Ice's ultimate saber form had been thwarted previously, but now, they had returned empty-handed. It was enough to prove that this attacker was someone with ulterior motives. He must have observed Yunyang's saber truth, Destiny Blade before this and meticulously planned countermeasures. Only then could he escape unscathed under the saber truth, Destiny Blade. If it were a one-on-one fight, Yunyang would still be unafraid. He was even confident that he could kill the other party within 5 moves. However, the other party was not alone and would not fight him alone. The endless deicide arrows and siege bolts, as well as the tens of thousands of soldiers below, were all his helpers. They were his support. Under such circumstances, the chances of Yun Yang killing him alone were minuscule. Furthermore, he had been fighting for 4 hours. Even though he looked like he was handling the situation with ease, Yun Yang knew that while his mystical qi was endless, his mental and physical strength had been greatly depleted. Otherwise, with his current cultivation base and saber truth, destiny blade, even if the other party had a countermeasure, he would still be able to put the other party in a difficult position. How could it be like now, where they were evenly matched? The initial exchange of blows between both parties had roughly the same result, which boosted the confidence of the attacker. Once again, he rode his sword, this time with a stronger attack than before. At the same time, Yun Yang could vaguely feel that dozens of deicide arrows and siege bolts were locking onto him. This was something that would never have happened before. Now, with this person holding him back, his movements were restricted and he could no longer easily shake off this kind of targeting. From afar, 3 silhouettes soared into the sky. Their deific consciousness that rippled through the air followed, coming to flank him. It was obvious that they had seen an advantage and did not want to let the person who had attacked just now take all the credit. However, their arrival inevitably made Yun Yang's situation even more dangerous. Further away, there was an endless stream of people rushing over. Finally, they've all come out. Yun Yang said softly in his heart. These people who had appeared now were the Empire of Zio's trump card, they were the true pillars of stability. These people would not usually appear, as they were the last line of defense in their respective families or royalty. Unless it was a matter of life and death, they would not come out easily. Today, however, they could no longer stay out of the battle. No matter how selfish or self-preservation they were, the situation had come to a point where they had no choice but to act. No matter what the thoughts of the 3 people in the second wave were, it was a fact that their deific consciousness resonated with the person in front of them. Yun Yang could immediately tell that these people were old acquaintances who had a great rapport with each other. Once the 4 of them joined forces, his situation would become even more difficult. Therefore, his current priority was to kill this person who had ambushed him before the other 3 arrived. Yun Yang's gaze was cold as he suddenly hollered, "Take this!" He charged forward like he was flying, the divine edge in his hand raised high, sealing off all possible escape routes in an instant. He was forcing the other party to fight him head-on. His saber light flickered, the tip of the saber quivering slightly. The person chortled. "Take a saber from you? What can you do even if I take another 100 slashes from you? You're just out of tricks." Not only did the person speak valiantly, his actions matched his words as well. He charged forward without backing down. Yun Yang dared not let the 4 of them meet, but he dared not let Yun Yang charge forward either. On one hand, he knew that there was no longer any force behind him that could restrain Yun Yang. Once Yun Yang charged over, this supreme cloud could leap more than 3,000 feet in one breath with his current extreme speed. This was an outcome that no one could accept. After all, another 3,000 feet and he would be less than 10 miles away from the city gate. The Board of Justice's courtyard was only 30 miles away from the west gate. 20 miles had already been lost. If he were to charge another 3,000 feet forward, the remaining distance would only be 7 to 8 miles. The distance was too close, and there were too many variables. Furthermore, he had considerable confidence in Supreme Cloud right now. Just like Yun Yang's judgment, he was a meticulous person. He had been observing Yun Yang's saber skills and was confident that he had a thorough understanding of Yun Yang's saber skills. No matter how marvelous Yun Yang's saber skills were, the movements and trajectories of his saber skills were all seen by the person's eyes. No matter how marvelous Yun Yang's saber skills were, they were no longer mysterious, so they could not form a lethal attack. In addition, the person's cultivation base was above Yun Yang's maximum cultivation base. If he were to take the risk and severely injure or even kill Yun Yang, he would be taking all the credit and glory. Due to these 2 factors, he could only face it head-on. As the saber light flickered, the divine edge and the opponent's sword light collided head-on for the first time. Just like the person's judgment, there was a gap between their ultimate abilities. In such an extreme clash, Yun-Yang would be the first to bear the impact of the other's force. Yun-Yang felt his wrist go numb and his body tremble. Seeing that the force of the impact was about to hit him, a strange glow appeared around Yun-Yang. Instead of retreating, Yun-Yang advanced, going against the flow, and the saber laid back and a thought of life and death were unleashed at the same time. A crack rang out. The opponent's long sword was chopped into two by the divine edge as expected. Clearly, the other party did not expect such a demerit. The sword in his hand was one of the top 10 superior-grade divine weapons in the entire continent. How could it be broken so easily? In the blink of an eye, blood spurted out from his chest, and he was sent flying backward like a kite with its string cut. The person was a pinnacle cultivator indeed. Even under such dire circumstances, he had still managed to evade the fatal strike. His reflexes and the dexterity of his skills were remarkable. However, all of his reflexes and responses were futile. This was because, right behind him, a tiny kitten had appeared out of nowhere. It was floating there silently and quietly. Chapter 434. No one had noticed this kitten before this. How could there be a cat in the chaotic battlefield? High up in the air? It was only the size of a fist, how did it get up there? The kitten looked harmless, but it was actually, down below. The tens of thousands of people felt their hearts skip a beat as a sense of foreboding rose within them. They roared at the top of their lungs, "Be careful!" Meow. With a soft cry, Whitey Two's paw landed hard on the unguarded back of the Zio expert's head. Smack! This expert's entire head was completely smashed just like that. His body seemed to be in disbelief, unable to comprehend the current situation. He twisted in midair, wanting to turn back to see who had killed him. Just now, there was clearly nothing behind him. How could an enemy suddenly appear? How could he be ambushed so suddenly? This should not be possible, it was impossible. His body followed the command given by his mind at the very last moment, turning back in the air with his chest facing his back. It was a pity that his last wish had failed because his eyes would never be able to see again. His body paused in the air for a moment before he dropped down. Even until his death, he was still in a daze, passing away without knowing why. An expert of his generation had passed away, just like that, his soul had gone to the netherworld. Countless people watched the scene unfold before their eyes. At this moment, everyone felt as if the world before their eyes had turned black and white, there was no other color. This was simply a nightmare. Ding Yunlu's promise had been shattered and everyone had sunk into a nightmare that they could not extricate themselves from. With the appearance of this person, Yun-Yang was defeated for the first time, causing his peerless saber skill to fail. The crowd's hope was reignited, thinking that this nightmare could finally end. However, the result was that their savior had fallen, their hope shattered, and they were once again trapped in a darker nightmare. Yun-Yang did not know who he had killed, but how could the people below not know who it was? This person was a legendary figure in the empire of Zio, the king of swords, Chu Hanxue. This person's reputation was like the sun in the sky. Once he attacked, all the swords in the city would sense it. Such a legendary figure had fallen so easily in front of his eyes. Even his long sword, which was rumored to be a legendary artifact, was cut into 17 or 18 pieces. This was a reality that they could not accept. The Sword King of this generation had just declared that his opponent had exhausted all his tricks and was immediately slapped in the face. He had been injured by the saber moves that he had thought he had broken long ago, and he didn't even have a way to die that was befitting of his status. His head had been smashed to pieces by a palm-sized kitten. This way of dying was really degrading. Everyone looked up in a daze, only to see that the sky was empty. There should have been a kitten that had just killed the Sword King Chu Hanxue there. How come it had disappeared? It seemed like no one had seen where it had gone. It was as if this was really a dream. When he woke up, the kitten was gone. But Chu Hanxue was dead. He was really dead. The three people who were rushing over from afar felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Their eyes were filled with disbelief as they watched this scene unfold. They could not help but slow down. How could Chu Hanxue have died so worthlessly? How could the Sword King of this generation not even leave a mark on Supreme Cloud? Had he not already seen through his opponent's saber moves? Had he not declared that his opponent had exhausted all his tricks? Should he not have had the upper hand? Why was he the one who had died instead? They were stunned and hesitant, but Yun Yang would not be stunned nor would he hesitate. Seizing the opportunity, he charged another 1,000 feet forward. His saber gleamed brightly in midair, like a dream. From the moment he had flown into the sky until now, he had been hovering in the air for 3 hours. This was a terrifying amount of time. The three people who had rushed over had already fallen behind him and to his side. Even if they had caught up, Yun Yang would no longer be passive. These three people had already lost their composure due to the unexpected death of the Sword King, Chu Hanxue. Their combat power would definitely be greatly reduced. He still had a lot of trump cards that he had yet to use, enough to deal with the three of them. Furthermore, he had already made his move. The three of them did not have enough time to chase after him. However, at this moment, an unusually strong aura appeared out of nowhere, right in front of Yun Yang's left. Yun Yang's gaze froze, his body swaying in the air like a willow swaying in the wind. A hunched silhouette appeared out of thin air, quietly appearing 100 feet away from his left and striking with a palm. The palm strike was like a mountain-splitting axe, with earth-shattering power. As the palm struck, the entire space beside the silhouette turned black at once. The space had also changed due to this person's attack. A black hole no less than 30 feet in diameter was formed from the palm strike. The moment the black hole appeared, it had already swallowed everything in the original space, generating a massive gravitational force. Yun Yang could not cast his wind and cloud manifestation now, but even if he could, he would still be delayed for a few breaths when faced with such a strong gravitational force. The powerful palm strike was about to reach him, but the terrifying howl of a ghost that was produced from the palm strike was heard. The speed of the force was faster than sound. It was Elder He. Yun Yang recognized the person at once. It was the old eunuch who had always been by Zio's emperor's side. Yun Yang had already determined the old eunuch's ability from this palm strike, fourth heaven pinnacle. The old eunuch's ability was more than a level higher than Venerable Lord Saber's. The forceful force enveloped Yun Yang, covering a wide area. Complemented by the strong gravitational force, it was obvious that Yun Yang had no room to evade. Yun Yang looked like he was restrained by the strong gravitational force due to the sudden turn of events, unable to evade in time. Faced with the sudden palm strike, he only made a slight movement to evade but stopped abruptly. Then, he hurriedly pushed his palms out, as if he was reacting hastily. In spite of this, there were wisps of green around the edges of his palms. With a loud boom, Elder He only felt that his thunderous palm strike had indeed hit the target. However, the feeling of hitting the target was as if he had hit a cotton bag or hit a cloud. There was actually no resistance at all. There was even an inexplicable force of attraction from the other party's palm. This time, it was Elder He's turn to lean slightly forward due to his miscalculation of the enemy. However, his reaction speed was extremely fast, and he gathered his strength at the bottom of his feet in the nick of time. His entire body immediately sank a full 30 feet, and he even leaned back to prevent himself from losing his balance. Supreme Cloud, on the other hand, seemed to have suffered an even greater impact. With a loud crash, he was sent flying away. Elder He, who seemed to have gained the upper hand, paled instead. He knew that the situation was not right. The other party still had the strength to cause him to lose his balance, so there was no reason for him to be sent flying. It was only logical that everything had been planned by the other party. In that case, he must have had some other plan in mind for him to be sent flying. Once he thought about it, he cried out shrilly, "Stop him!" The three experts who were rushing over from the side watched as Supreme Cloud was about to be severely injured by Elder He. Despite being lucky enough to withstand the palm strike, he was still sent flying far away. Everyone's gaze was filled with mixed emotions. F***ck, we've finally arrived at the crucial moment despite our haste, but we've been taken advantage of by this ambiguous old eunuch. If we'd known this earlier, we might as well not have appeared. With that thought in mind, there was a momentary pause. Their movements were unavoidably a step slower. Even when the old eunuch's shrill reminder rang, the three of them still had not reacted. When they regained their chi, they were even slower. As far as the eye could see, Supreme Cloud's figure was sent flying like a cannonball after the palm strike. Wherever he passed, the air was filled with wisps of green smoke. It was obvious that his speed had reached a terrifying level. His destination was the General Wudi Shrine. Elder He's powerful palm strike that shattered space, coupled with Supreme Cloud's own energy, covered 5,000 feet in the blink of an eye. In the end, he crashed through the wall of the General Wudi Shrine with a loud boom. Amidst the smoke and dust, Supreme Cloud's body had disappeared. Elder He's body shot forward, leaving a trail of afterimages in the air as he flew toward the General Wudi Shrine with a shrill whistle. The other three men followed closely behind. These three men were truly eccentric. Instead of reflecting on their own failures, they were gloating at Elder He's misfortune, thinking, "This old man has been tricked." Ha ha ha. Yun Yang had absorbed Elder He's energy by force and borrowed it to fly away. His plan was successful, but his actual cultivation base was still 2 levels lower than Elder He's. Although the endless divine art protected his heart meridians and internal organs, he could not help but be shaken by the sudden surge of energy. Yun Yang felt as if his organs were on fire, his mouth and nose were bleeding. He took in a deep breath of energy to make himself fly like a meteor, following the predetermined path, forcefully breaking through the General Wudi Shrine and entering. At a glance, he saw that there was a memorial tablet of General Wudi's family of 3. Under the memorial tablet, there were 2 skeletons wrapped in yellow cloth. Further ahead was the incense table, where smoke was still rising. Without further ado, Yun Yang shattered the 3 statues with a palm strike and grabbed the skeleton and the memorial tablets that were wrapped in yellow cloth, keeping them in his spatial ring. He hollered, "The Empire of Zio has fallen. General Wudi, come home with me. Our family will be reunited from now on." Before his words echoed in the air, he moved again. This time, he broke through the wall on the other side. Amidst the billowing dust, Yun Yang shot out like a bolt of lightning, like a majestic eagle piercing through the clouds and fog, soaring through the 9 heavens. At the same time, the majestic General Wudi Tower, one of Zilong City's landmarks, suddenly tilted to one side. The top of the tower, hundreds of feet tall, fell with a loud crash, following the direction that Yun Yang had come from. It was obvious that Yun Yang's 2 attempts to break through the wall had shaken the tower's foundation. When he broke through the wall for the second time, he had even aimed at the direction that the tower could no longer support itself. After a series of rumbling noises, the sky was filled with dust and smoke that didn't stop for a long time, immediately blocking the line of sight of countless people. Yun Yang, on the other hand, had increased his speed to the maximum. All of his goals for this trip, including the additional ones, had been accomplished. Of course, he wanted to leave now. And when he first rushed out, what maintained him was a kind of grief and indignation that could not be vented, as well as a kind of anger that had been suppressed to the extreme. It had made him want to go on a killing spree, to be presumptuous for once. He knew that it was impulsive, that it was reckless, but he had still gone on a killing spree. Although he knew that it did not match his identity as the Nine Supremes think tank, nor was it something that a wise man would do, he had been overwhelmed by rage and grief. After all, he was only a youth who was not even 20 years old. Halfway through the killing spree, however, Yun Yang's rationality had returned. He immediately felt that what he had done was foolish, that he was merely deceiving himself. At the very least, the Four Seasons Tower's top experts who had targeted Supreme Cloud had been killed by Jun Moyan. That was why he could act so recklessly. On the contrary, Yun Yang asked himself, if the Four Seasons Tower's fifth or sixth heaven experts were still here, would I still dare to be so impulsive? Furthermore, if Jun Moyan had not kept his promise and killed all four of the Four Seasons Tower's leaders, what would he do? It was true that Jun Moyan killing the four men was part of his plan, but what if Jun Moyan did not value the Medallion of Gratitude that much? After all, the person directly involved in the Medallion of Gratitude, Old Dugu, was no longer around. Thinking deeper, Jun Moyan was still from the empire of Zio. He had helped him out of friendship. So what if the other party did not fulfill his promise and killed him instead? Thinking about it, Yun Yang broke out in sweat, drenching his shirt. It was just that Yun Yang was already in the middle of it then. He had already charged out impulsively, leaving in such a flustered manner seemed even more foolish. Since he was already foolish and impulsive, he would carry on his impulsiveness to the end. When he caught a glimpse of Shengguan Lingxiu, Yun Yang decided that he would take the opportunity to bring General Wudi's remains back with him. After all, Zio's national fortune had been swept clean by him. The imperial seal's providence was gone, and the national treasure had become an empty shell. From a certain perspective, the empire of Zio could be considered as a fallen nation. With that, General Shengguan Wudi's vow all those years ago could be considered fulfilled. The difference was similar, how could it be perfect? Therefore, Yun Yang decided to bring Shengguan Wudi's remains back. I've been impulsive, I don't regret it. I've been impulsive to the end, I've been foolish to the end. However, I still have to make some valuable compensation for my impulsiveness, for my foolishness. Suddenly, a gust of wind tore through the air. It was a siege arrow that had been fired from afar. Just as Yun Yang charged out of the thick smoke, the siege arrow was already 30 feet away from him. It was obvious that the person controlling the bow was no ordinary person. In addition, Yun Yang's deific consciousness detected that there were 3 people rushing over from his left and right. Behind him, there were also 6 people flying towards him like lightning. In front of him, however, there was a siege arrow coming for him. Yun Yang let out a shrill howl, his swift form changing its direction in midair and taking off in a slanted manner like a flaming arrow. His waist retracted abruptly, feeling a chill from his abdomen and the sensation of intense friction. Shreds of clothes flew everywhere, and the smell of burnt flesh rose up from the high speed. Blood splattered. The siege arrow that had been prepared for a long time had hurt Yun Yang in the end. The siege arrow had come from a delicate angle while Yun Yang's forward momentum was swift. Despite his swift reflexes and sudden change of direction, he was still slightly injured. However, Yun Yang managed to avoid the arrow and kicked the siege arrow viciously with both feet. The siege arrow was kicked by him with all of his cultivation, and it immediately turned half an arc in the air. With incomparable ferocity and precision, it shot towards Elder Hei's chest, who was rushing over at full speed. It was equivalent to a siege arrow that possessed all of Yun Yang's power. Combined with its own terrifying speed and the weight of the siege arrow itself, the extreme combination of these 3 factors truly possessed the power to slay gods and Buddhas. Elder Hei knew how powerful it was, so he dared not face it head-on. He quickly dodged and floated away. Yun Yang, on the other hand, flew 500 feet into the air with the help of the recoil after the kick. He was like a human-shaped kite gliding in the sky. From the ground, he was only the size of a watermelon. Whitey too, who was high up in the sky, suddenly howled. Its snow-white body appeared beneath Yun Yang's feet, resuming its previous state of being one with the beast. Whitey 2's snow-white body opened up smoothly and carried Yun Yang as it flew upwards in a straight line. In the blink of an eye, they were already 1,000 feet high in the sky. The dozen or so silhouettes that were charging upwards like arrows were confused. Some of them even staggered in midair and almost fell. The other party had a flying mystical beast. How could they stay? Just as the cumbersome siege bows were raised, all the soldiers operating them were dumbfounded. How could they attack? The other party had already become a tiny black dot in their eyes. How could they attack it? It was like shooting a mosquito with an anti-aircraft cannon. At most, it was a reference value. Theoretically, they could hit it, but in reality, it was impossible. The deicide bows were stunned as well. They had fired arrows with all their might, their hands were already drenched in blood. In the end, they had released their target into the sky. That's an eclipse panther. Not a flying mystical beast. Elder He almost spat blood. The other party had borrowed his strength to charge into the shrine of General Wudi, and the shrine had collapsed immediately. It had charged out amidst the chaos and had actually reached 1,000 feet high in the sky with a swoosh. The clash of palms just now had made him feel that the other party's ability was definitely not as terrifying as it looked. As long as he was given a chance to fight it head-on, he would definitely be able to take it down. However, the other party had ascended into the sky. Elder He could not help but think of a saying, "If you're so capable, why don't you ascend into the sky?" Now, however, all of a sudden, they were in an extremely awkward situation. The others rolled their eyes as well. Yes, you're right. That's not a flying mystical beast. However, the eclipse panther had a very strong ability to hover in the air. Of course, it could not fly thousands of miles away like a hawk or a rock. However, it was still a piece of cake for it to stay in the air for a quarter of an hour. They did not even have such a thing on their side. They could only rely on the experts to take turns to fly up and attack. With their strength, flying so high had basically cost them half of their cultivation base. Fighting this supreme cloud would be like sending themselves to death. In the sky, the eclipse panther carried Supreme Cloud on its back, flying in a straight line toward the west gate. On the ground, the hundreds of thousands of people were dumbfounded. They had been engaged in a brutal battle for almost a day, and this was the outcome. The siege arrows and deicide bows fired a volley of arrows in vain, but the result was as expected. It was completely useless. The 17 or 18 Heaven Realm experts stopped 200 feet in the air, as if they were on display. It was not easy to go up, it was too embarrassing to go down. This kind of awkward situation was too unbearable. Elder He gathered everyone together. There's only one way now. Another elder scoffed and said, "This old man knows Minister He's plan. It's nothing more than sending at least 8 people up to form the 8 Gates Golden Locks formation. These 8 people will then use their life force to lock onto Supreme Cloud and prevent him from escaping, limiting his mobility as much as possible. Finally, 4 people will complete the kill, am I right?" Another elder replied coldly, "Of course, this is indeed a plan. However, Elder He is naturally not a member of the 8 Gates Golden Locks formation, am I right? The 8 Gates Golden Locks formation is naturally formed by us." Elder He said sternly, "I'm not a selfish person. If I have to sacrifice myself in exchange for national peace, I won't hesitate to do so. However, I have the highest cultivation base here, so the damage I can do to Supreme Cloud will be the greatest." The others smirked without saying a word. One of them chuckled. That's right, my cultivation base is low, I deserve to die. I've let down the country and the people, all right? However, where did you, Elder Hay, come from to be so righteous? We have families, we have countless people we can sacrifice for, but you, Elder Hay, are only doing this for the country and the people? Elder Hay's face turned purple, murderous intent swirling around him. Another person said, what can we do even if Supreme Cloud leaves? We can kill the two mystical beasts down there. At the very least, we can cut off one of his arms. This was obviously nonsense. Two mystical beasts could cut off half of Supreme Cloud's arm. Everyone knew that it was impossible. Supreme Cloud had relied on the 9 Supremes' mystic arts to dominate the world, it had nothing to do with these mystical beasts. In spite of this, the other dozen people agreed with him. Not bad, not bad. This is a good idea. The two mystical beasts are too dangerous. They must be eradicated. Let's go down. The group charged down with high morale. Only Elder Hay was left standing alone in the air. Elder Hay stood there in shock, feeling that the sky above his head had turned black. Below, the two mystical beasts were fighting valiantly in the midst of countless people. The deicide arrows and siege bolts that could not harm Yunyang were lethal to them. Now, they were covered in wounds. Yunyang was in the sky, riding Whitey 3. With a glint in his eyes, he wanted to charge down. Based on the current situation, Yunyang realized that he could leave unscathed. As long as Whitey 3 flew at a low altitude and turned invisible in his pocket, he would land and turn the bear and snake into miniature versions before soaring into the sky. With Whitey 3 on his back, he could still ascend to his current height in the blink of an eye. Then, he could leave. Just as he was about to descend, he suddenly felt alarmed. A sense of extreme danger rose within him, sending chills down his spine. Yunyang urged Whitey 3 to advance at full speed while he leaped up at the same time. His reflexes were already considered top-notch in the world, he had already made evasive maneuvers as soon as he had a premonition. However, it was still too late. He did not want to write this chapter. There would be flaws in writing a character like this, making it seem imperfect. Still, he wrote it. It was impossible for a character to be flawless. Yunyang was human too. He would be sad, impulsive, calculative, and hysterical at times. He was finally coming to an end at this point. This was Yunyang's flaw. Sometimes, when he had been repressed for too long, he would explode and act impulsively. He was not flawless. He did not know if all of you would like it. Chapter 435. Just as Yunyang and Whitey 2 merged again and were about to leave Zilong City at their highest speed, Yunyang's tensed heart finally relaxed a little. He could finally relax. The experts on the other side were behind him. Once Whitey 2 had unleashed its maximum speed, no one in Zilong City could catch up to it. Furthermore, there was still Shengguan Lingxiu's troops lying in ambush outside Zilong City. The outcome was a foregone conclusion. However, just as Yunyang let his guard down, a sudden change occurred. From somewhere on the ground, a ray of sword light soared into the sky, flying towards the sky like a thunderbolt. The sword light alone was already hundreds of feet long and had already locked onto Yunyang, not allowing him any room to escape. The speed of the sword light had exceeded the limits of Yunyang's imagination. It was already beneath his feet in a flash. In the next moment, it was Whitey 3 who shrieked first. Whitey 3, who had been in a state of vigilance and protection, had leaped forward in a desperate attempt to protect its master when it saw the ambush, using its own body to block the fatal blow for Yunyang. Yunyang was alerted by the thought. Just as he sprung up, the divine edge in his hand once again, before he could move, the sword light grew even brighter. The tip of the sword was aimed right at his back, where it would be fatal. In spite of this, Yun-yang could only see blood splattering all over the place. Both of Whitey Three's legs had been severed, blood gushing out of them. It was trembling from the pain, the severity of its injuries was unprecedented. Ever since the Whitey had acknowledged Yun-yang as their master, everything had been smooth sailing. They had never been so severely injured. Yun-yang's heart ached for them. Yun-yang howled and swung his saber like lightning. At this moment, he no longer cared about the consequences. The first 3 forms and 6 styles of the divine edge were executed instinctively. Merciless blade. Merciless Tao. Saber laic. Life and death in a thought. Inverted river of blood. Reincarnation under saber. The first 3 forms of the divine edge were unleashed at the same time. This was a treatment that even Venerable Lord Ice had not received the other day. For a moment, the entire sky within 1,000 feet radius was filled with saber light. The sword light was the first to unleash its power. At this moment, its sword path was at its peak. It fearlessly met the attack head-on and clashed with the blade of divine will. Immediately after, it let out a surprised snort. Then, another beam of white light suddenly shot out, ignoring the ingenuity of the blade of divine will. It forcefully broke through the blade light formed by the convergence of the 3 moves of the blade of divine will and directly attacked. Yun-yang held his saber with both hands and blocked with all his might. Immediately, he felt that the other party's strength was so strong that it could topple mountains and overturn seas. There was no way he could defend against it. Yun-yang grunted. Not only did blood spurt from his mouth, but he was also flung backward, hundreds of feet away from the impact. His heart was overwhelmed with shock. This person's cultivation was terrifyingly high. It was at this moment that the heavily injured Whitey 3 launched a counterattack. It opened its mouth with all its might, spitting out wind blades while the ball of light in its mouth was formed and shot out with a boom. The person was also thrown several feet back by the combined attack of the blade of divine will. However, this person was truly remarkable. With a long howl, he spat out his foul breath and with a flash of his sword light, he was about to continue his pursuit. However, Whitey 3's ball of light was already in front of him. He was someone who knew his stuff, so he dared not be careless. His sword was ready and he blocked the attack with all his might. The head-on collision caused a loud boom. The person was in midair after all, so he was hit head-on by the powerful force. Boundless energy exploded and he was sent flying 1,000 feet away without any leverage. On the other side, Whitey 2's attack had arrived as well. Whitey 2's vision was momentarily obstructed when it was under Yun-yang, so it was even slower when it realized that it was ambushed and Whitey 3 was severely injured. However, Whitey 2 was not injured. The ball of light that it had condensed was a highly condensed condensation of its lifetime strength. Its power was unstoppable, even more powerful than Whitey 3's counterattack. Seeing that the deadly light ball was about to hit him again, the man had no choice but to block it again. Although it still didn't cause any damage, he had already retreated more than 3,000 feet. His image in midair was exactly like a shuttlecock, being kicked away again and again. This feeling made the newcomer fly into a rage. If he had been on the ground, these 2 attacks would not have affected him at all. However, they had pushed him thousands of feet away even though he was high up in the air. Furthermore, the mystical chi that he had accumulated earlier had been completely depleted after he had dealt with the lethal ball of light twice. He had to descend for a breather, and could only watch Yun-yang leave. Despite his rapid descent, he could only watch as Yun-yang left. Despite the person's rapid descent, his eyes were still locked in the direction where Yun-yang had left. It was obvious that once he landed, he would chase after Yun-yang once he had time to catch his breath. He already knew that the reason Yun-yang could stay in midair for such a long time was because of the 2 little mystical beasts. However, one of them was already severely injured and could no longer do anything. Although there was still one left, Yun Yang's ability was mediocre. He did not believe that Yun Yang could escape from him. Unexpectedly, at this delicate juncture, just as his body was about to land on top of the tallest building in Zilong City and was about to land on the ground once more, the yellow bear went berserk. A deafening roar rang out. Not far from where he had landed, the yellow bear began to go berserk. It let out a roar that sounded like despair towards the sky. Its gigantic body, which was hundreds of feet tall, expanded once more. With a ferocious stance, it slapped its gigantic paws that were the size of 2 small houses in all directions. With a stomp of its hind legs, the Zio soldiers nearby were shocked to witness an unbelievable scene. The yellow bear's gigantic body suddenly soared into the sky. There was a saying that went, "I can jump higher than a mountain because a mountain can't jump." What if a mountain could really jump? As for how high it could jump, that was secondary. The key was how much damage it could cause after it jumped. How much damage could it cause? This was basically unimaginable. It was beyond the scope of an ordinary person's imagination anyway. Now, however, a certain bear had gone beyond its limits and soared into the sky. It was the state that was closest to the so-called mountain leap. The yellow bear soared into the sky, leaping more than 300 feet into the air. Then, it let out another deafening roar. Immediately, its huge body made a half-turn. All of a sudden, it threw the moor python, which had already returned to its wrist, away. It was flung towards Yun Yang's direction. This king of mystical beasts, known for its strength, had actually made the most difficult choice in its life at this moment. It had turned the most powerful force that it could unleash in its entire life into a single throw. The force of this throw was astounding. It had actually flung the moor python thousands of feet away. Yun Yang was sent flying by the opponent's tyrannical force. He spat out blood as he retreated. His vision was a little blurry now. The opponent's sword energy had pierced his body the moment it broke through destiny's convergence, causing Yun Yang's limbs and bones to feel as if they were being cut by countless knives. Just as he was in excruciating pain, he saw the moor python in the form of a small snake suddenly appear in front of him with a swoosh. Yun Yang stretched out his hand almost instinctively and caught the moor python in his hand. The moor python that was already covered in wounds turned its head forcefully, ignoring the fact that its body was about to break. Its eyes were staring into the distance behind it. 2 drops of tears formed in the snake's eyes that had always been cold and rolled down quietly. Roar! After flinging the moor python away, the yellow bear's sturdy body let out a third deafening roar. This roar made Yun Yang's heart skip a beat. This was because the roar was filled with the intention of parting, filling the sky. Yun Yang focused his gaze to observe the situation. He saw the yellow bear's massive body make a forceful turn as its rising momentum came to an end, crashing into the building where the swordsman was about to land with an unstoppable force like the weight of a mountain. The swordsman was about to land, the tip of his feet almost touching the tiles, but the entire building suddenly disappeared. Not a single tile was left. The swordsman's original plan had been foiled. Not only did he miss his footing, but he was also affected by the negative effect of using the wrong amount of force. He fell like a kite with a broken string. When she landed, she fell into an incomparably sturdy embrace. The yellow bear roared savagely and hugged the person in its embrace with all its might. Then, its 2 bare paws slapped furiously as if it had gone mad. Chapter 436. The man did not have the time to catch his breath. His mystical chi was exhausted, and at the delicate moment when he was out of breath, he was held tightly by the yellow bear. For a moment, he could only exhale, but could not inhale. With a few cracking sounds, 3 of his bones were broken by the yellow bear. This was the result of the yellow bear's inability to break through his mystical chi, and the fact that his cultivation base was profound and his protective mystical chi was strong. However, with this contact, the man finally managed to catch his breath. As he spat out a mouthful of blood, he let out a loud cry. His long sword glowed brilliantly once again, and the invincible sword light and sword energy were unleashed by the swordsman in an extremely violent manner. In that instant, he had truly used every bit of strength in his body. Every bit and every drop of his strength was unleashed. The man's heart was filled with boundless hatred, hating the black bear that had ruined his plans. Not only did this bear deserve to die, it had to. The yellow bear continued to roar wildly, not backing down at all as it engaged the swordsman in battle. The man and the bear fought in the collapsing buildings, causing dust and smoke to billow. Yun Yang's eyes were suddenly filled with tears. The swordsman's true ability was above Yun Yang's. Even if the yellow bear, who could not even defeat Yun Yang, had the upper hand in the beginning, it was impossible for it to win. The swordsman knew this, Yun Yang knew it, and the yellow bear knew it as well. However, it had still done so, without any hesitation. Just like Yun Yang, it had been impulsive for the sake of friendship, it had no regrets even if it died. Before the battle of certain death, he had first thrown the Moor python, the opponent that he had been pestering for his entire life, out. The meaning was obvious: I'll cover the retreat, you go and survive. The Moor python hissed, trying desperately to break free from Yun Yang's grip and rush back. Yun Yang held onto its body tightly, holding the heavily injured Whitey 3 in his arms and tossing out 2 balls of spiritual chi of vitality. Then, he flew towards the west gate. He had been impulsive once. He could not be impulsive a second time. If he and the Moor python were to rush back, then the meaning of the little bear's sacrifice would be lost. Therefore, Yun Yang left decisively. However, as he was escaping, he could not help but turn back to look. His heart was throbbing with pain. He hoped that the sturdy body would still be able to rush over and catch up to him. Once again, he transformed into that silly, mini bear. However, although the voices behind him were still chaotic, they gradually calmed down. Yun Yang sighed softly and sped up. He could already see the shadow of the West City Gate. Whitey 2 suddenly dropped to the ground. Shengguan Lingxiu and the rest had been paying close attention to the movements in the sky. Her men were already stationed on both sides of the city gate. Seeing that the long-awaited supreme cloud had finally arrived, Shengguan Lingxiu commanded the 200 or so battle-hardened warriors under her command to strike at the same time. Amidst the splattering of flesh and blood, a passageway appeared in the defense of the west gate. All of Zio's attention was focused on the city. Although the city was heavily guarded and guarded by many cultivators, their actual capabilities were still a few levels lower than the participants in the city. Not only was Shengguan Lingxiu's ambush sudden and unexpected, many of them did not understand what was going on when the Zio troop was ambushed. Was Supreme Cloud not in the city? How could we be attacked from the left? Did he see a ghost? No, Yutong's reinforcements had come to Supreme Cloud's aid. Zio's army was quick to react, sending troops from other places to rush over at once as if their lives depended on it. However, it was too late. The city gate had fallen. As Yun Yang descended, his saber light flickered as he roared, "Follow me out of the city." The glimmering saber light was like a long dragon. The tightly shut city gate that had already fallen like a heavy dam had no room for resistance in front of the divine edge. A large hole was blasted open with a loud bang. Dust and smoke billowed as Yun Yang charged out first. Shengguan Lingxiu followed closely behind. 200 warriors exited the city and began sprinting. Behind them, countless deicide arrows chased after them. They were so dense that they covered the sky. In spite of this, the final destination of these arrows was the gaping hole in the city gate that Yun Yang had blasted open like a flood. The lethality of these arrows was almost zero. Although Shangguan Lingxiu only had about 200 men under her command, each of them was a veteran who had been through hundreds of battles. Once they exited the city, they dispersed immediately. That thick and solid city gate became the safest shield for everyone. The group charged forward along the path in front of the city gate, sprinting as fast as they could. They were cultivators with an impressive cultivation base, so their speed was rather impressive. After all, they were only out of the city, it was not yet a safe distance away. They were still within the spiritual restraining formation. The city behind them was filled with people shouting and horses neighing. It was chaos everywhere as countless people cursed loudly. The city gate, which had a huge hole in it, was slowly opening. There were even more people who charged out from the corner of the gate to give chase. In spite of this, almost everyone knew that the chances of success were slim. Yun Yang and his troop were already tens of thousands of feet away, far away from the boundary of Zilong City's city gate. In spite of this, Zio's army obviously did not want to give up. More fireworks were shot into the sky, informing the troops stationed far away outside the city to begin mobilizing and encircling them, hoping for a fluke. It was their last effort. Although leaving Zilong City would mean that Supreme Cloud's manifestation powers would be restored, he was not alone now. There were 200 to 300 of them. Supreme Cloud could turn into the wind and clouds and leave, but what about the others? With the others holding him back, before these people were all dead, it was believed that Supreme Cloud would not abandon them. This meant that Zio still had a chance to kill Supreme Cloud. Follow me. Everyone, advance on the official road. Once they left Zilong City, Yun Yang sensed the spiritual qi situation between heaven and earth at once. He realized that the coverage of Zilong City's spiritual restraining formation was wider than he had expected. It was not something that could be recovered immediately once they exited Zilong City. They had to walk a little further before they could shake off this damned formation. Naturally, he took the lead without another word. He was still pretending to be Elder Yun, so Shangguan Lingxiu did not recognize that the Supreme Cloud in front of her was actually her sweetheart, Yun Yang. However, out of her absolute trust in Supreme Cloud, she would execute his orders without hesitation. Everyone followed Yun Yang in a straight line. After sprinting for more than 10 miles, the pursuers behind them could already be heard rumbling noises. Dust filled the air. It was obvious that Zio's army had deployed their cavalry. Only the speed of a cavalry could catch up to the cultivators who were sprinting at full speed. Yun Yang sucked in a few deep breaths. He had already swallowed a dozen healing spiritual pills that Lei Dongtian had given him along the way. In addition to Emi, a natural cheat, his body had recovered considerably. After charging another 500 feet forward, Yun Yang's expression changed abruptly. He could finally feel the spiritual qi of heaven and earth that he had not felt for a long time. The long-awaited spiritual qi of heaven and earth was dancing in the air like fairies. They had charged out of the formation. Yun Yang realized it immediately. Yun Yang was not the only one who felt it. Shangguan Lingxiu and the rest felt it too. The moment they arrived, it was as if they had crossed some barrier and freed themselves from some shackles. Even the air they breathed was exceptionally fresh. Their minds cleared up at once. Shangguan Lingxiu instinctively knew one thing: they had escaped from danger this time, their journey ahead was free of worries. Freed from the restraints of the spiritual restraining formation, Supreme Cloud's manifestation powers had been reactivated. What else in this world could threaten Supreme Cloud? Continue to retreat at full speed. I'll bring up the rear. Yun Yang was still carrying old Dugu as he said decisively, "We're no longer within the range of Zilong City's spiritual restraining formation. I'd like to see if Zio's army still has the ability to do anything to me." Shangguan Lingxiu agreed without hesitation. She saluted as she sprinted and whistled as she sprinted forward. When they passed by a forest not too far away, dozens of people galloped out with hundreds of horses. They were the people Shengguan Lingxiu had arranged beforehand. This was a more secluded spot at the border of Zilong City's spiritual restraining formation, so it was only natural that they had set up a backup plan here. Everyone then leaped onto the horses as they galloped, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Everyone knew that they would not be of any help to Supreme Cloud if they were forced to stay and fight alongside him. They would only be a burden to him. Leaving Zio's territory as soon as possible would be the best assistance to Supreme Cloud. Only Yun Yang was left at the back of the group. He continued to walk slowly, step by step, breathing in the spiritual qi of heaven and earth carefully. He told himself inwardly, from now on, I shall never step foot into the territory of this spiritual restraining formation for the rest of my life. Behind him, there were countless pursuers coming from all directions. Everyone could see Supreme Cloud, who was walking slowly on the road. Why was he walking so slowly? Could it be, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Supreme Cloud took a step forward, one leg disappearing from sight. He then turned around slowly, and as he did so, his body vanished as well. Only a head was left on the spot, its eyes still staring coldly at the army that had surrounded them. Then, even the head was gone, leaving only a pair of eyes. Then, the eyes were gone as well. Supreme Cloud's body had vanished into thin air. Everyone who witnessed this scene felt their scalps go numb. Yes, they were out of the designated area now. Supreme Cloud's powers had all returned. Did this mean that Supreme Cloud's manifestation powers were about to wreak havoc? Chapter 437. Suddenly, the howling wind in the air grew louder and more ferocious. All of the pursuers were shocked to see this scene. They all gave the order to stop their pursuit. What was the point of giving chase now? Could they destroy the wind and clouds, but could they destroy the water and fire? Right now, Zio's army no longer had the ability to kill Supreme Cloud. This was a fact that Zio's army did not want to admit, but they had to. Even though they had stopped, the changes in the sky did not stop. For a moment, the wind blew and the clouds surged as countless dark clouds began to converge. Bolts of lightning streaked across the sky like giant silver snakes. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew and lightning flashed. It was as if the heavens had been extremely enraged by something, striking down on the tens of thousands of soldiers. A voice spoke faintly in the air, perhaps it's been too long since you've tasted this feeling? Use your lives to savor it. You can do anything. However, no matter what you do, don't cross the bottom line of being human. Clouds were made of water, but they were lighter than water, floating above the 9 heavens. Ever since Yun Yang had cultivated the holy water charm, he had a deeper understanding of his cloud manifestation cultivation method. Furthermore, after his trip to the lunar river and his cultivation of the holy water charm to the 2nd stage, he had achieved a new level of advancement. Strictly speaking, it should be the combination of the various divine arts to further improve. Using his cloud manifestation cultivation method as a base and the holy water charm as a guide, Yun Yang had conjured boundless dark clouds, stirring up the wind and thunder to form the current storm, lightning, and rumbling thunder. It was a combination of the 4 manifestation powers. In the past, Yun Yang had turned into dark clouds as well, but it had mostly been to deceive others and conceal his tracks. This time, with the aid of the holy water charm, the dark clouds he had conjured were truly dark clouds. They stretched endlessly and were the pivot that connected the wind and thunder. With a furious roar in the sky, lightning bolts came crashing down from the sky. Countless lightning bolts filled the sky in an instant and rained down like a torrential rain. The army that had gathered here immediately fell into chaos. Even the warhorses that had been trained for a long time were extremely terrified when faced with this sudden change in the weather. They ran and jumped uncontrollably, trampling all over the place. Countless soldiers were struck by the lightning bolts. Those who were covered in wounds and blood were considered lucky, there were even more who were turned into charcoal. After a while, the wind in the air grew stronger. Zio's soldiers were thrown off their feet, unable to stand or open their eyes. Many of them were sent rolling on the ground by the wind. Under such circumstances, the lightning bolts were still falling from the sky. The situation was extremely dire. No, the dire situation that Zio's soldiers had to face was not the worst yet. While countless soldiers were struggling to move and had fallen into an unprecedented state of chaos, the ground was changing as well. The surface temperature rose rapidly and the layer of snow that had piled up on the ground melted continuously. In the span of a few breaths, there were patches of grass exposed on the ground while the surrounding trees were drying out rapidly. With a strange bang, a ball of flame suddenly appeared. Then, this ball of flame spread out, and in the blink of an eye, it was like a prairie fire. From Supreme Cloud's traceless figure to the sudden change in the weather, dark clouds covered the sky, wind and thunder converged, and finally, a single spark ignited the prairie. The entire process took less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. Tens of thousands of Zio soldiers were in a state of chaos. There was no longer any discipline to speak of. In a trance, Supreme Cloud's figure suddenly reappeared in front of them. He was still dressed in the same cotton robes as before, advancing quietly like a carriage. His speed was still not very fast. However, no one dared to chase after him. The Zio mystic cultivators who had chased him out of the city stood where they were, their expressions complicated. None of them dared to move recklessly. Such a celestial phenomenon was proof that Supreme Cloud's divine powers had been restored and that he had truly cultivated the divine powers of the other 9 Supremes. Moreover, he had integrated them and mastered them so effortlessly that he could command them as if they were his own limbs. Faced with such a Supreme Cloud, no one in this world dared to say that they could act recklessly. "I'll be back in an hour." A cold voice that was filled with boundless cruelty came from afar. "I hope that by then, there'll be someone here who can talk to me. I believe that all of you know what I want." Before his words echoed in the air, Supreme Cloud disappeared once more. However, everyone stood rooted to the ground, dumbstruck, as if they had lost their minds. Countless people were thinking, what does he want? What does his last sentence mean? What do we know? What does he believe in us? Supreme Cloud, this devil, what is he talking about? In spite of this, some of the quick-witted generals were alarmed and sent the news back without stopping. The news was too important. If Supreme Cloud came later and could not give an answer, the consequences would be unimaginable. The chaos just now was only a warning from Supreme Cloud. He had yet to unleash his full strength and was not relentless in his pursuit of death. In that case, what he wanted was even more important. The generals were already terrified. If he could not produce it when the time came, the consequences would be unimaginable. Zilong City was in an unprecedented state of chaos as if it had gone through a calamity. The battle had almost destroyed half of Zilong City. Everywhere was a scene of devastation and debris. The devastation of the situation was almost unbearable. It was the end of the world. Supreme Cloud had entered the city and caused so much destruction in this battle. Furthermore, this was under the premise that Supreme Cloud was not in his best condition and had not used the powers he was adept in. If Supreme Cloud were to seek revenge, would the situation be even worse? Supreme Cloud, the brainchild of the 9 Supremes, was truly a devil, a demon that brought disaster to the world. The people in the city and the pursuing troops outside the city came to the same conclusion. Perhaps Supreme Cloud, Yun Yang, had used his actions to prove the evaluation of Zio's people and everyone else in the world other than Yutong's people. Devil. The empire of Zio's emperor was standing at the highest point of Zilong City's building, looking down at the ruins around him wordlessly. He could not help closing his eyes slowly as he looked at the blood and minced flesh that stretched for dozens of miles. All he could hear were innumerable moans of agony. At this moment, the Emperor of Zhou, who had once been praised by Yun Yang as a great strategist, felt waves of helplessness. It was a sense of helplessness and disappointment that came from the bottom of his heart. His gaze was a little hollow, a little unfocused, a little helpless, but it was mostly resentment and sorrow. After a while, his gaze slowly swept across the faces of the 20 officials beside him. Zhou's think tank, the head of the civil officials, the chancellor, Lan Wuxin, was also dumbfounded. His face was ashen, as if he had aged 100 years within a day. It was an expression that said there was nothing left to live for. The emperor of the Empire of Zhou knew very well that the source of this incident was the trouble caused by the children of a few noble families who had gone out of the city to hunt. The chancellor, Lan Wuxin, was the culprit of this incident. It was this old thing who had single-handedly invited his enemy, Supreme Cloud, into the heavily guarded Zilong city. It was also him who had confirmed that Supreme Cloud was the phantom physician, god of wine, Feng Xiang'e. It was also him who had instigated the emperor to save Feng Xiang'e in hopes of recruiting him to serve Zhou. It was also him who had sent the imperial treasure, the heart of Siderite, along with the imperial jade seal, to the enemy. The imperial treasure had been destroyed on the spot. Although the imperial jade seal had been returned in perfect condition, what had actually happened? Elder Yun had said that he wanted to steal the Empire of Zhou's fortune. It was most likely true. He would not have been so kind as to only take 1/10 of it, he had most likely taken all of it. In the end, it was still him who had personally escorted Supreme Cloud to the Board of Justice to meet the assassin. It was him, it was all him. Chancellor Lan Wuxin was to blame for everything that had happened. To say that such a crime was so heinous that even death could not atone for it was already the lightest of punishments. His entire family should be executed, his 9 generations of family annihilated. If it had been in the past, the Emperor of Zhou would have killed Lan Wuxin long ago, executing his entire family. Now, however, he had no idea what was going on. He had no intention of holding Lan Wuxin accountable at all. He even felt a tinge of sympathy for him. After a while, the Emperor of Zhou's gaze turned from lifeless to sharp and dangerous like a hawk. Chapter 438. It was not until all the civil and military officials lowered their heads that the Zhou Emperor spoke. Only then did the Emperor of Zhou's voice ring out calmly, devoid of any emotion. Ever since I've ascended the throne, I've always been confident. I thought that I had the heart to rule over the world, the will to conquer heaven and earth, the ability to reorganize the universe, the power to conquer Tianxian, and the plan to conquer the world. I've never been as disappointed as I am today. The Emperor of Zhou's faint voice suddenly turned violent as he roared. It's not just disappointment. It's despair. Despair, do you understand? The Emperor of Zhou's voice was like an injured beast, growling in grief and indignation. For so many years, I've always thought that I'm not inferior to the Empire of Yutong's Emperor, Yu Peiza. I might even surpass him. I even despise him for not being able to conquer the world despite having such strong support from the 9 Supremes. If the 9 Supremes were in Zhou, I would have conquered Tianxian a long time ago. Before this, I've always thought so. I've always thought that God is unfair. Why did the 9 heavens domain land in Yutong back then? Why didn't it land in Zhou? But today, I know that I've been wrong. Gravely wrong. The Emperor of Zhou's voice was slightly shaky. He took in a deep breath to steady his voice and resumed his calm tone. Today, I've seen the difference. The entire Zilong city has been emptied of its citizens and a dragnet has been set up. There's also a spiritual restraining formation that specifically targets the 9 Supremes' powers. Yet, it can't hold back a Supreme Cloud who's not fully capable. The Emperor of Zhou asked in anguish, "Let me ask all of you. Does Zio really not have the ability to hold back Supreme Cloud? His gaze swept across each and every one of them as he asked in a heavy tone, even if we, Zilong City, mustering all of Zio's combat power, can't we really take down a Supreme Cloud like this? A million-strong army, the heart of the Empire, the spiritual restraining formation, the dragnet. His voice became heavier and heavier. Can't you even trap one person to death? Can't you capture him or capture him? What's more, this person would have to jump out brazenly and start a head-on battle, fighting one against many, fighting one against 10,000. Can we let him escape? Can't hold him back? All the ministers' faces were ashen as they lowered their heads, but no one dared to say a word of explanation. Luckily, no one is trying to quibble and come up with all sorts of reasons to say that there are various reasons why Supreme Cloud was able to break out of the encirclement. At least all of you have some dignity left. Not bad, we are all people with pride. Huh. I refuse to believe this result. But today, it has been proven that we can't hold him back. I didn't manage to make him stay. Under the siege of the million-strong army and the encirclement of Zio's top-notch experts, the enemy managed to escape unscathed. You come and go as you please. You're free and at ease, as if you've entered an uninhabited realm. Just now, I really felt humiliated just now. But now, I am very clear in my heart. What is there to be humiliated? Isn't it a foreseeable possibility? This is what I should do. We should have known and foreseen it from the beginning. If Supreme Cloud couldn't leave and couldn't escape unscathed, it would be the strangest thing in the world if we captured him instead. That would be God being blind. The Emperor of Zio hollered like a thunderclap. Hearing the Emperor of Zio's words, all the officials subconsciously shuddered, guessing why His Majesty would be so enraged. Everyone was shaken to the core. Still, no one dared to speak. No matter what they said now, it would be futile. I've always thought that the Empire of Zio's military power was the best in the world, that the sharpness of our army was unparalleled. We had all the conditions to unite the world, but due to Yutong's superior geographical location and the fact that we've produced so many talented generals, we haven't been able to expand our territory. Even when we've exhausted our forces every year, attacked every year, and returned empty-handed every year, the time has yet to come. Heaven can't always be watching over Yutong, can't always have good generals. I've always thought that the Empire of Zio has many noble families, their martial prowess is formidable, their thousands of years of heritage is the Empire's foundation, the Empire's strong support. But the truth has proven me wrong. I've taken it for granted. That's not the Empire's foundation, it's not the Empire's strong support. It's only the power of each of your noble families. It's only your foundation. I've always thought that my ability wouldn't pale in comparison to Yutong's Emperor Upeza, but today's reality has made me realize that compared to him, I'm still far behind. I've always thought that as long as Supreme Cloud enters the city, he'll be a bird in a cage, a fish in a net, a prisoner. But the truth has shown me that I've been wrong again. I've always thought that the Empire of Zio is our homeland, that we should work together to protect it. But the truth has proven me wrong. This is still my wishful thinking. This empire belongs to me alone, it has nothing to do with all of you. It's beneficial to have it, but there's no harm in losing it. There's nothing to be concerned about. The Emperor of Zio's voice grew colder and more sinister. The Empire of Zio has the King of Spears, the King of Swords, the King of Sabers, the King of Staff, the King of Spears, the King of Whips, the King of Fists, and the King of Hidden Weapons. Renowned martial artists, legends of mystical cultivators. The Empire of Zio has 10 kings who dominate the world, dominating Tianxian. The Empire of Zio actually has the King of Swords, the King of Sabers, the King of Fists, and the King of Fists. So many mighty names. What domineering nicknames. They make me feel so King awesome. I'm honored. The Emperor of Zio was the only one who cursed for the first time in his life in a tone that was filled with uncontrollable rage and hatred. It was vulgar. It was undisguised and unpretentious. The Empire of Zio doesn't have these kings and saints. Even if there were, there would only be one or two at most. Each person had two people. But the Empire of Zio has at least dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. With such a formidable martial force, why can't we become the world's hegemon? The reason is simple, it's all of you. The Emperor of Zio stood up, his fingers trembling as he pointed at them one by one, his gaze filled with resentment. You, and you. Do you know, Lan Wuxin is the most guilty in this matter, but I haven't punished him until now. Why? Why do you think it is? Because no matter how wrong Lan Wuxin was, his heart and his original intention were all for the Empire's good. He was loyal to the Empire, without a shred of ulterior motives. He had contributed all of his family's combat power in this ambush of Supreme Cloud. Of course, he had the mentality to make up for his mistakes, but he did his best. He was the only one who did it, without holding anything back. On the other hand, what about all of you? Where have all the kings and saints under you gone to? Is there anyone who came to help? I'm really muddle-headed. Wasn't there still a King of Swords? It wasn't that there wasn't anyone who came to help, but that King of Swords died like an idiot. What kind of help was that? Did he come out to make a fool of himself? And then there was the Saint of Swords. He appeared at the last moment and acted. For the first time, there was someone who could injure Supreme Cloud severely, but it was too late. What the F***ck were they doing earlier? Why couldn't they have acted earlier? It was such a good opportunity, even I could see it clearly. The Emperor of Zio roared. There are still many top experts and super cultivators who haven't shown their faces yet. None of them have appeared. All of the Empire of Zio's top-notch combat power has been gathered by your families and shelved. Even when the Empire's survival was at stake, you would never have brought them out. Even when you saw Supreme Cloud strutting around and mocking Zio, even when you saw Supreme Cloud leaving unscathed, you still wouldn't have brought them out. Because this Supreme Cloud is very strong. If you had brought out your secret top-notch combat power, they might have been in danger, they might have died. Once those experts died, it would be your family's combat power that would be affected, your family's overall capability would be affected. Is that so? Even if the Empire of Zio were to fall, as long as your families still have these forces, they can still do as they please in the new dynasty, exchanging for riches and glory. Their rights will not be reduced. Is that so? All of you can still live happily. Even if the Empire of Zio were to fall, all of you wouldn't have to die except for me. All you have to do is kneel and kowtow, say a few words, acknowledge another emperor in name, and all of you can still enjoy high positions and generous salaries, be dukes and marquises for generations to come. Therefore, this empire has always belonged to me. It belongs to me alone. It's not yours at all. Naturally, I wouldn't care about your concern. Today, I've finally thought it through. I've thought it through, WinGGHOYOU. Chapter 439. The Emperor of Zio was like a wounded lion, glaring fiercely at the civil and military officials present. I used to laugh at Yutong's emperor. He didn't have many noble families with strong foundations under him. Even when he had the help of some, they were all loyal to the empire, like the Leng family, the Shengguan family of generals, and the Fang family. However, these noble families had all lost their bloodlines in the years of war. There was no one to carry on their legacy, only a legend remains. But what was the meaning of such a legend? What was its value? I used to think that they no longer had any superior martial power, that they were a pile of loose sand. They were only waiting for a suitable opportunity to disperse with a single strike. How could the Tower of Sand survive for long? But today, I finally know what Upeza has. I am truly envious and jealous of him. I was wrong. I was wrong from the very beginning. I was gravely wrong, so wrong that I can't explain myself. It's not that they don't have the so-called noble families with strong foundations, it's because Yutong's noble families have all died fighting for the empire. If it weren't for their sacrifice, how could Yutong, who was surrounded by enemies on all sides, have held on until now? To have the support of such noble families, to have such loyal officials, how can I not be envious and jealous? In the past, I was very fortunate that Zio still had so many elite martial artists. Zio would never have to worry, never to fall. Now, I know the truth, I know the reality. It turns out that these elite martial artists in my eyes, the experts who guard Zio, are all cowards who are afraid of death. The reason they can live for so long is because they've never gone to the battlefield. They don't dare to go to the battlefield, that's why they've survived. Because they've never contributed to the empire, never contributed, never sacrificed. Of course, they can survive. The so-called casualties of Zio's warriors, the gains and losses of Zio's land, and the empire of Zio's honor and disgrace, none of these matters mattered to them. Of course, they could survive. Living a peaceful life is the way to immortality. Therefore, they, who have always existed in this world, have become kings. What kind of sages are they? Then, they have become your watchdogs. You heard me right. You. I've thought about it before. The Nine Heavens domain was indeed in Zio and not Yutong. I would have long unified the world. But now that I think about it, I was wrong. Indeed, the Nine Heavens domain had fallen into Zio back then. With so many powerful aristocratic families in my country, how could I have protected this piece of land? I have long lost my empire. If my Zio were to be attacked by 5 enemies like Yutong, how could I have defended myself? Not to mention 8 to 10 years, 3 to 5 years, even if it is only a year and a half, I have no confidence. Yet, Yutong has been able to stand guard until now. Their ambition to conquer Tianxian has never died. What right do I have to be mentioned in the same breath as Emperor of Yutong, Upeza? The difference is too great, too great. Such an Emperor of Yutong. Extreme admiration. King Hell, what a great emperor, what a great ruler. The Emperor of Zio screamed at the top of his lungs, this is King Great Emperor. Who, Emperor of Zio was panting heavily. None of the 20 or so ministers present dared to raise their heads to speak. The main thing was that he had nothing to say. Indeed, what the Emperor of Zio had said was the undeniable truth. Zio's military might could not keep Supreme Cloud, who had all his powers sealed away. What kind of joke was this? It was impossible. However, there were still hundreds of thousands of troops attacking from all sides. The encirclement was so tight that not even a fly could escape. Could Supreme Cloud have ascended to heaven? Everyone was thinking that they should wait a little longer. Perhaps, the experts of the other families would have made their move and taken care of Supreme Cloud. The risk of loss would be borne by the other families. It was enough as long as they did not suffer any losses. As long as their combat power could be preserved, they might even be able to annex other forces and territories after this war. Just like that, they waited and waited, until when everyone felt that things were not looking good and began to make their move, Supreme Cloud had ascended to heaven. They were only a short distance away from leaving the city. They were only one step away from it. By then, it would be too late to do anything. It would be too late to even regret it. Selfish. Self-serving. These 2 points had ruined the empire of Zio's chance to completely destroy the 9 supremes. The Emperor of Zio was remorseful. Lan Wuxin, Chancellor Lan, you've done your best in dealing with Supreme Cloud. The Emperor of Zio said softly, I don't blame you. Lan Wuxin sobbed, tears streaming down his face. I'm only curious now. The Emperor of Zio said with his eyes closed, the Emperor of Yutong, Upeza, how did he withstand the storm from all sides? I ask myself, if I were in his shoes, how would I have handled it? All the civil and martial officials looked ashamed. The Emperor of Zio's harsh words had spoken to the deepest part of everyone's heart. Although it was uncomfortable, it made sense. This was the truth. Many of them were ashamed and regretful. Just like what had been said earlier, it was too late. If regret was useful, there would not be so many regrets in this world. The Emperor of Zio's voice came faintly, everyone, I've spoken my mind. Now, it's your turn to ask yourselves, if things were to start over, would you still do the same? The civil and martial officials were shaken when they heard him, thoughts running through their minds. That's right, if things were to start over, what would we do? No matter how much they thought about it, no one made a sound. Some of them even lowered their heads in shame. Obviously, even if things were to start over, there might not be anyone or any family that would come to their aid. The Emperor of Zio sighed helplessly at the sight before him, a bitter smile hanging on his face. My officials, my arms, my backbone, my empire. Ha 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 ha, suddenly, someone came in with a report. Your Majesty, Supreme Cloud didn't leave immediately after arriving outside the city. He said that he would return after an hour. What did he say exactly? The Emperor of Zio asked in a low voice. Supreme Cloud said, I hope that there'll be someone here who can talk to me when the time comes. He also said, I believe you all know what I want. As soon as he said that, all the ministers felt their hearts tremble. Supreme Cloud had barely escaped danger, but he didn't leave immediately. He even wanted to turn back. What else do you want back? What did he want? I believe we know, but what do we know? The Emperor of Zio chuckled coldly and said, Ministers and officials, do you know what he wants? He said that he believes you all know. For a moment, the officials were deep in thought. They could not figure it out. He had already left. He actually came back. What did he want? You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.